got 2 minutes. Now we probably have 1 minute.
Redlining, Ed faced them all. He was honest and he was square, but he was assassinated one January night in 1969. He was only 39 years old.
Session. I'm Jerry Cornfield, reporter at the Washington State Standard. We're going to start this hour talking about transportation with the chairs of the committees in the House and Senate. The budget will follow, and the budget writers will be in the room offering their magic potions for the shortfall. And then we'll have the leadership of the four caucuses here, and Governor Bob Ferguson expected around 11:30. Those who were here last year may remember he had a little surprise for us when he rolled out his budget priorities. So we'll see if he has a surprise for us this year. So we have Senator Curtis King on the end from the Republican caucus on the lead on the Senate Transportation Committee. Next to him, Senator Marco Elias, a Democrat and the chair of that committee. And then his counterpart in the House, Representative Jake Fye, and the Republican lead on transportation, Representative Barkus. Sorry about that. Well, Frank, I want to just dive right into this first question because it's a short session and both committees will be starting with the issue of the proposed budget from Governor Bob Ferguson, and he is proposing to spend about $3 billion more, put about $3 billion more into the transportation system over the next decade. And to raise the money, he wants to do something that you folks did not do last session. He wants to tap in and to that revenue stream of the new gas tax and the higher fees that you passed. He wants to bond, sell bonds and pay off with that money. So you didn't do that last session. Will you do it this session? So starting with Senator King, I just wondered is that the path the legislature should go, and spending that money to preserve roads, maintain bridges, and build new ferries? That's what the governor wants?
I could give you an easy answer, and that would be no. But it doesn't seem to be the logical place that we should be looking at raising money to pay for maintenance and preservation by bonding. As someone said, and I don't remember who, but it's like, we're going to be, all of the things that you do with maintenance and preservation will be used up and gone by the time we pay off the bonds. And so I think we got to look at other ways of trying to accommodate that. Doesn't mean that we don't have a problem with maintenance and preservation. We all know that we do, but I don't think bonding is the way to get there.
Yeah, I think there's sort of two things I'm thinking about when it comes to our preservation needs. The first is when we look at the jobs report that was released today in DC, we see that the jobs picture in the U.S. is weakening. We know in Washington State from our Revenue Forecast Council that 2025 saw very little job growth, and 2026 potentially will be flat. So one of the things we can do to create jobs in the short term is more highway preservation. Economists tell us that every $1 billion in highway maintenance and preservation is, between 10 and 20,000 jobs. So the economy right now in Washington could use this. I think we need to be putting more into preservation and maintenance. I agree with Senator King that we should only bond for things that are going to last longer than the bond period. We know that 10% of Washington's bridges are over 80 years old. So if the governor's proposal is to use bonded funds to replace some of the very old bridges that we have seen fail us in the last year, then I think there may be value in taking a look at that. But bonding to pay for more routine pavement maintenance that's not going to last for 30 years, I don't suspect the governor supports that either, but I think we do need to be careful about what we're buying with it. At the high level, though, whether it's buying new ferry vessels, replacing those aging bridges, or just doing a better job of maintenance and upkeep on our highways, it's clear that we have to rededicate ourselves to preservation and maintenance.
So the bonding proposal is in the context of what else we've done, and in particular the revenues that we raised last session. To be clear, I believe the Senate did pass a bonding bill last session, and we chose on the House side, Representative Ferguson and I agreed that that was not the time to be doing that, especially when you consider the other needs that are out there in terms of culverts. There's mediation going on right now with respect to culverts. There is a lot of projects that have been dating back to 2015 that are not yet complete. And we did work in the House to identify where we were with respect to the capital needs on the ferry system, and there's other needs for that we don't have the resources for in a few years from now. So it's a little early to be talking about bonding, but what I would say is this: no doubt, the legislature has failed to provide enough resources for preservation and maintenance. We need to find a way to do that. And we do need to address the ferry system, but like what we found with our road projects, we're getting cost escalations. Things are costing a lot more. We're into territory that is new for us. And so I think caution, the yellow light, which hasn't come on yet, I think has to be considered. But we will hear the governor's office out on their proposal and make sure we understand what the request is.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here on a beautiful Friday morning. My answer, along with Senator King, no. Appreciate the governor's newfound interest in maintenance and preservation, and I'm glad that he is looking at all the things that we need to do. I agree with my colleagues here. I disagree a little bit that we failed. I think we've done an incredible job here, especially in the budget work that the four of us have done in the last several years on putting forth dollars for maintenance and preservation. I think it really does come down to priorities and what have the priorities been over the last 20 years. And maybe maintenance and preservation just wasn't at that high level that it should have been. So I'm glad that we're taking a harder look at that. But I think that if we're going to address maintenance and preservation, we need to look at existing revenues. You're going to hear me all session long talk about the use of Climate Commitment Act. I know that goes contrary to some of my colleagues on this panel this morning, but I think that we need to, and the people of Washington State would agree with us, that we need to start putting some of those existing resources before we further the responsibility and the debt load for the people of Washington State. We currently carry about a $1.8 billion, if not more, debt load on the current bonding that we have in the state, and I agree that we need to reserve that capacity for the bigger issues of the growth that we're going to need to do in infrastructure over the next many years.
Okay, before I ask my second question, I'll alert everyone after this one. We'll open it up and take questions from the audience. There is a TVW person who will have a mic, so if you do get called on, just give them a moment to reach you so you'll be heard for the audience. In the area of money and in immediate needs, the terrible storms in December, there's a lot of damage to the infrastructure. Money will be needed now and in very short term before any federal aid might even arrive. So talk a little about how is the state and the legislature going to deal with those costs in this session? And does it or will it impact the project lists that are out there? Will anything be delayed, improvements put back because we need to deal with the emergency of the storm damage right now? And I'll start on this end with Representative Farkas.
Thanks, Jerry. First of all, I just want to say what a fantastic job that WashDOT is doing right now. The crews are out there as we speak all over the state, hustling and working in tough conditions to put our roads back together, especially along Highway 2 and many other areas in the state of Washington. So a big shout out to them. Of course, we're going to have to look at it. We're going to see probably a list in all of the aspects of the damages that were done to the infrastructure throughout Washington state. Cost estimates will be put forth by WashDOT. We will have to look at that for immediate need right now. But again, I will say that until we get some indication that we're going to receive federal funds, which I'm sure we will at some point, that we can backfill, we do have resources to use. I've already proposed and dropped a bill to allocate Climate Commitment Act money, that extra surplus Climate Commitment Act money that was received over and above what was originally anticipated for the state of Washington in this last year, about $690 million, to be able to use those funds for emergency, as this was a climate-related issue with this storm that hit here in December. So I think that we will have to have conversations before we start looking at moving projects or canceling different things to reprioritize some of the spending that we're going to do in this supplemental budget.
I appreciate the question, and I had occasion to talk to one of the regional administrators, and it's going to be a while till we know what the full costs are. But for instance, in the Olympic region, they really have only one project that is a big concern in terms that will have some serious expenses to it. That's not true in other parts of the state, but if you look at the governor's proposal, there was quite a bit of underspend so far, and I think that we can float and make sure that, as a priority, make sure that the governor has the money he needs to be able to address things. And, you know, we're talking about, on a normal situation, an 85 to 90% reimbursement by the feds of the major costs here. So it's not like we're and I think it's good to presume that that's going to happen. And so we should do that. But I would, again, also indicate my appreciation for the work that it's not just during the storms, it's every day. It's that we have great people who are out there working hard to make sure that roads are safe and that people can get to where they need to get. And they've done an excellent job in very adverse circumstances.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of the comments that my colleagues have said. I also want to, in addition to WashDOT and the incredible work that they've done, Secretary Meredith has done, I also want to thank the governor. He's been to Snohomish County multiple times to visit the flood damaged areas, and I know that he's been paying a lot of attention to this as well. In addition to making sure that we're getting a sense of what the costs for the State Department of Transportation are, as we toured the flood damage, there's a lot of county and city infrastructure that was also damaged. So I've asked our local government partners to help give a sense of what the total costs of damage have been for them. I think we need to make sure, you know, for the residents in rural parts of Snohomish County, it's not just Highway 2 that they depend on to get their products to market or get folks to where they need to go. It's also our mostly our county roads, but in some cases city infrastructure as well. So I want to make sure that the entire system is recovering, and I am worried because the federal reimbursement often tends to take a long amount of time. And for our smaller jurisdictions, you know, unfortunately a city, and in some cases our rural counties, can't float millions of dollars while we wait for federal reimbursement. So I think we need to take a holistic look at this. I sort of disagree on the funding source, likely not a surprise. We did, you know, increase the gas tax in July for the reason that we need to invest more in preservation and maintenance and resilience. So I think we have additional resources coming on board. The revenue projections show that gas tax increase is delivering resources for our budget. So I would like to look at that as a source for maintenance and preservation and recovery efforts. I think we told Washingtonians that as we're paying more at the pump, it's going to be immediately invested back into making our system stronger and more resilient. I think this is the moment to sort of put our money where our mouth is and show that we're going to invest those dollars to help recover from these disasters and make our infrastructure more resilient as we move forward.
Well, I don't have a whole lot to add there, but I agree with a lot of what has been said. We have to have some numbers so we know how drastic this is going to be and how we need to respond. And I agree with my good chair that, you know, we did pass a gas tax and we do have those monies available and they are coming in. And I would be remiss. I drove across Snoqualmie Pass yesterday morning. It was probably about 6:30 or 7 o'clock. It was somewhat still dark out, and I can tell you there were crews going both directions, 3 trucks. I mean, what I thought was going to be 10 to 12 inches of snow, the roads were absolutely great. And they were doing an absolutely fabulous job and have always done a fabulous job on keeping that pass open as best as they can, other than what's caused by the drivers that tend to want to go a little faster than they should be going. And then you know, as I was driving over, obviously, I went under Bullfrog, the overpass that was damaged a month or 2 ago. You know, they got rails that need to be put up, and I think within a week and a half, that project is going to be done. And it's utterly amazing what can be done when there's an emergency. And the point I'd like to make is, you know, if we can do this when you have an emergency, why in the world does it take us forever to do a project? We ought to consider every project an emergency, and it would be done timely, efficiently, effectively, and probably at a much less cost. That's just my comment for that. But getting back to the question, I need to see the numbers. I need to see how big it is. We need to find out how long it's going to take for the feds to come through with hopefully what they're going to help us with. But we obviously have a long way to go with that flood damage and storm damage. But the 4 of us will sit down and look at that and figure out how we're going to address it. I can assure you that. So thank you.
Okay, we're going to take a couple questions, and I don't think going forward, all 4 of you have to answer every question if it's not necessary, but I wanted to hear your voices to get you started this morning on everything. Let's start with Mitchell. And Tim.
Senator Elias, during the last session, there was concern that the state may not have enough existing revenue to kind of continue some of the ongoing projects, specifically the North Spokane corridor. At the end of the session, the state increased the gas tax by approximately 6 cents. I was just wondering, going forward, if you anticipate any other kind of challenges with funding, or if you anticipate these projects to continue uninterrupted.
Yeah, with respect to the North Spokane corridor, you know, our initial budget projection when we wrote an all cuts budget, and then we had a budget that showed what the revenue could pay for. The all cuts budget did show that we wouldn't be able to complete all those phases. So when we made the decision together, bipartisan, bicameral, to move forward, it does include full funding for North Spokane. That project is on track. We are going to finish it. I think as we move forward, the real question is how do we adequately fund preservation and maintenance? The department tells us, in round terms, I think we need about $1 billion a year in additional funding for preservation and maintenance. We don't have that fully identified. I think that's the discussion we need to begin. I also appreciate Representative Barkas reminding us that we have made substantial investments, and Chair Fye and I in Move Ahead put $3 billion more towards preservation and maintenance. Those funds are beginning to come online. I think we have agreement that the new resources from the gas tax should largely go to preservation and maintenance. I think this session we can start to lay out what that looks like. But we are going to finish the job on important projects like 520, the Columbia River Bridge, North Spokane corridor. We are going to get the job done on those, and the budget we passed last year puts us in a strong position to get those projects done.
When we passed the budget, the primary objective, because of the cost increases that we had, 520 being the biggest example of $700 million over original estimate. I know I think all of us agree that we made commitments in 2015 to a number of projects, the North-South Spokane Freeway being one of them, and I understand that some bids will be coming in shortly on that. What we don't know is what kind of bids we're going to get. So I would say it would be hard to justify taking money from preservation and maintenance to fill the hole of, if we get cost increases on projects, what it probably will mean is we're going to have to look at the schedule of remaining projects about when they can be delivered, because we do need to make sure that we don't continue to dip into preservation and maintenance funds in order to fund projects. We just have to set different expectations about when people will have newer projects about when those can get delivered.
I would just add that, yes, we have this gas tax and we put in play. When we work at the budget, we don't just look at 1 year. We look at, of course, the biennial budget, the 2 years. But we've actually put into practice, the chair and I, looking at 6 years, 8 years. So we're projecting out as far as we can to take into consideration. Over the last several years, we've seen incredible cost increases on major projects, 520, 405, to name a few, 167. Highway 18 project doubled in cost. Will that happen in the future? Costs are going up. We anticipate that. We try to anticipate that in the budgeting work. I don't see us pulling from, we're going to keep saying maintenance and preservation. I don't see us doing that, but I am going to repeat that we should look at using other existing resources and reprioritizing the use of those dollars so that we do not pull from existing projects. We have the revenue from the gas tax to handle any increases in costs in the future, because remember, the gas tax is indexed. So the gas tax is going to go up every year in July, indexed to inflation. So it is going to increase even to offset some of the decline. But we should look at those existing resources so we don't do that. So we can do both, right? So keeping that project on task and keeping to our commitments, as the chair said, is a top priority for all of us up here. And I'm sure we'll continue to do that.
Simone? The second row.
Senator Elias, earlier on you mentioned aging bridges, and Tacoma Narrows Bridge is among the bridges that is currently deteriorating. Could you expand a bit on where bridges fall in terms of the list of maintenance and preservation needs?
Obviously, we care about all of our infrastructure. Our ferries are also aging rapidly. So to me, I think when we look at the dollar cost for projects, bridges and ferries are kind of the projects that there's a lot of cost to make sure that those are replaced when they need to be replaced. All of our systems, our pavement conditions in other parts of the state are also in challenging positions. But I think it just illustrates part of the challenge. So the department, and we had a presentation at our work session during committee days on the DOT's overall preservation program. So obviously our pavement and our bridges are important components of that. I just highlight the data though on bridges, because when 10% of our bridges are over 80 years old, we can do all the work we can to keep those in good condition, but you reach a point where you have to just replace those structures. They're not intended to last, for centuries. And so I think it's an indicator of, it's one of those warning lights on the system that we've got to do a better job of. I think for Tacoma Narrows, there's unique situations there because of how we finance the replacement of, one of those spans. And I think we need to have a conversation about, does the tolling continue to pay for maintenance and preservation of the whole facility, or how do we fund the replacement of that other span across time? That's a little bit more complicated than other bridge projects in the system. But our ferries and our bridges, have to be replaced on some schedule. They're very expensive when we do. That's part of why we've got to stay ahead of preservation and maintenance. And I will just because Representative Barkas is right that the gas tax is indexed. It's not indexed to inflation, though. It is a 2% increase from year to year. And I know he didn't mean to say that, but I just want, for those of you that weren't following our discussion last year, it's 2% that's more tracked to fuel efficiency improvements across the fleet over time. But the gas tax will go up at that 2% level from year to year. Just want to make sure we got that detail.
Since you asked about the Narrows Bridge, and it's at the edge of my district, and as Senator Elias indicated, the one span is covered by the users of the system, largely through the tolls that are charged. The other bridge is not, and I think I've heard numbers. If you did a full fix of that bridge, which I don't know you need to do every piece of this right away. I think it's something on the order of $150 million. But of course, it is very important to not only my district, but a lot of other folks, just like other bridges are so important. So because of the environment that we're here in the good state of Washington, we have lots of bridges and we need to make investments. And I would hope that we would set it up so that we target bridges and have, so that citizens know which bridges are going to get fixed and when.
Thanks for the question. There's no more glaring example of the, I don't know if I want to use the word failure, but problem than the Fairfax Bridge. Highway 165 on Carbon River, Wilkeson. I just was up there here not too long ago. I know Chair Faya has been up there. We do need to take a look at these bridges. And it's interesting that I keep hearing that the legislature has not done an adequate job in funding to do this. And I think part of the problem is getting that information to the legislature so that we know what is the priority, what is the pick list that needs to be done, what are the bridges that are most critical, and where is the money that, what are the needs of that? There is going to be legislation. I'm working on some stuff with some of my colleagues to work with WashDOT to be able to provide us a better understanding of dollars as part of that maintenance and preservation package specifically for bridges, right? So we do not ever see another situation like the Wilkeson Bridge, where for 20 years it was not maintained, hadn't been painted, weight restrictions year after year to a final closure in April, and now you have residents stranded on the other side of that. That is a priority for me. I think it should be a priority for the legislature to get that bridge replaced. However, there are so many other bridges, from the Narrows Bridge to the Swing Bridge in Aberdeen to the Hood River Bridge to you name it. There are so many things that we need to be doing. So again, it's a broader conversation. We're ready to do that as far as how we look at that from appropriations in the budget, but I think it will be working with WashDOT at a much higher level to find out what those priorities are and how we're going to do that. And I'll also just add that we need to do it in an expedited way. We must look at some of these as an emergency situation, like the Wilkeson Bridge or the Fairfax Bridge, and not go into a situation where we're looking at 8 to 10 years to replace critical infrastructure.
So I agree with most of what's been said here. I'm not familiar enough with the Tacoma Narrow Bridge to comment on that, but I would say I agree with Representative Chairman Fye as that, we need a good list of what are the bridges. We need to look at, put them in some kind of order of prioritization, look at, how much money is it going to take if we did all of them. We need to look at perhaps, I think it was somewhere in maybe the state of Pennsylvania that bundled like 500 bridges and put them out for bid. And, we have to kind of start to think out of the box of what we got to do to address this issue. The other thing I would say is we have to get real about the regulations and the requirements that we put on every time we want to fix one of these bridges or build or replace a bridge. It's like, well, you can't get in the water because of this period of time, and yet you can have rain and snow and hail and at the same time that brings down trees and branches. I mean, much more disruptive than what you would see if you were doing construction on one part of a river, as an example. You don't span the whole river with the project. You do part of it at a time. I mean, there's been studies that show, these fish that we keep trying to save that are going around this, they're not stupid. They figure it out. They know there's a way, and they go around it. We have to get real about what we're doing and what we require, because it's expensive, and it's not only expensive, it takes time. And time is not one of our friends, because we all know that if we delay for a year because you couldn't get in the water at this certain time, then you delay it for a year. It's another 10, 12, 15% to the cost of that. So we have to, prioritize. We need a good list, but it's a list that just goes along with all of our roads, all of the other things that we have to look at. But we do need to look at that and prioritize it.
Okay, we'll do Carleen and then John. And, wait a second, wait till, we want everyone to hear you.
Loud enough. Carleen Johnson with the Center Square. I'd be interested to find out, Senator Elias or Representative Fye, if you would be open to Rep. Barkis's suggestion that some CCA funding could be shifted over. And you mentioned, Senator Elias, no, but we did find out this week, I'm sure you're aware, that Ecology's numbers were data entry errors, so that the efficacy of those projects for emissions reductions are not nearly what they had been stated. So, given we do have all these emergent needs, critical infrastructure, why not at least temporarily move some of that money over? Because ultimately, if you're helping people move and goods move, you are impacting the environment, perhaps more effectively than some of the spending that CCA has implemented.
Yeah, I think, when we passed the Climate Commitment Act a few years ago, the goal is to reduce the state's emissions. That's the purpose of that policy. So I think, certainly in my time as chair, our focus has been on how do we reduce emissions in the transportation sector, and that should be the focus for these funds moving forward. I shared in previous interviews that once the damage is done, the opportunity to prevent the climate catastrophe to begin with sort of has passed us. So I don't think that fixing infrastructure that was damaged because of climate change is the most appropriate use for these funds when we can invest to get out in front of it. And I think Chair Fye and I have really focused on particularly making sure that our fleets have the resources they need to convert to clean fuels. That's what's going to improve air quality. Both Chair Fye and I have overburdened communities in our districts, and we've got to figure out a way not just to reduce climate emissions, but also a way to make sure that the kids in our elementary schools near airports or near the port aren't breathing dirty air. And those fleet incentives, the work we're doing to help Washingtonians convert to electric vehicles, and then the funding we're doing to expand access to transit and other safe, low-carbon transportation options. To me, that's the place where it makes sense to invest these CCA dollars. The beauty of this budget, though, is we work in a bipartisan way. So I don't agree with Representative Barkis on this, but we're going to sit at the table and keep talking until we figure out a way to pass a budget. Usually they say in the legislature the goal is 25, 50, and 1. Here in the Senate, our goal isn't 25 on the budget, our goal is 45 on the budget. We want to make sure this is solidly bipartisan. Senator King and I disagree on some things, and then we sit in rooms long enough until we find a path forward that we can both live with. We're going to do that on this issue. We're going to do that on every issue. Right now, we're in disagreement, but we'll keep talking.
So thanks for the question. Back when we passed the CCA, as the bill came over from the Senate, I was concerned that if we were truly going to do the job that the public expects us to do with related to emissions, if we were going to raise revenue in doing so, that we needed to make sure that that's where the money got spent and not on, like the constitutional amendment for highways, not spent on more additional roadway. And that is actually in the statute, is that it can't be spent for highways. So in our work, which I don't know whether the other budgets do, you have to ask them about it, but we specifically set up an evaluation mechanism. So those people who receive money from our programs have to report to us about not what they suspected they would get in terms of carbon emissions, but what actually occurred, so that if we see something isn't working, we move the money to place where it is. And here's the other part. One of our biggest expenditures that we agreed in when we did the 2022 package was the electrification of the ferries. That extra cost comes from CCA dollars. If it hadn't been for that, then we'd be paying for that, and it could be paid for out of the other resources that we have absent CCA. So very important things that help build out the system and provide for new ferries. But I think it's sort of a question in my mind. Do you fight over the size of the pie, or do you add to the pie? And I think it's more of a case in the work that we did this last session is to add to the pie.
Well, thank you for the question, and we are going to disagree on this one in a spirited way, of course. So much to unpack with the comments from my colleagues today. Senator Lee has made a good comment about paying more at the pump, and that we told the people we would reinvest. You're paying more at the pump with the CCA, about $1 something a gallon. So let's just put that on the table. Ferries, I think we're going to have a broader conversation of whether we actually should electrify the ferry boat fleet. That will be a conversation that will be had this session and moving forward as we're seeing the incredible cost to build out that infrastructure, some of the early failures of the early hybrid, and if we're actually going to get ferry boats in the water anytime soon. You know, we do invest the Climate Commitment Act in a myriad of good ways to help our environment, and there is a commitment to do that. And I appreciate Chair Fai's steadfast commitment to make sure that we're not going back on the word when they passed that bill. I was not in favor of it, but when they did, they committed that dollars would go to that. However, I just heard here recently that Governor Ferguson, in his proposal to fix the incredible hole in the operating budget, there's a little piece in there that says that about $800 million of CCA money could be used for the working families tax credit. Not quite sure how that relates to climate. So there are some other things, and you're going to see that dollars that are coming in for the CCA, especially the overages, that we had an incredible year of money coming in through that program, and there isn't a surplus. And I even think the dollar was even higher than $600 or $700 million, a recent report that I saw. There will be a lot of scrambling between the operating budget and transportation and others to utilize those funds. And maybe they'll be reconsidered that maybe at this time, as somebody had said, temporarily, those funds might be used for other things besides just the programs that have been put in place. I'll again say this. I think we need to reevaluate the spending, even on the CCA, in all aspects of it, and prioritization, to find out if it is the highest and best use to improve our climate using these taxpayer dollars, right? I really believe that is something that should be a conversation. That's why we're having a conversation about the ferry boats with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, whether is this the best reduction of carbon, is this the best use of those dollars? We're going to need to do that when we look at the entirety of this budget, not just for this supplemental cycle, but moving forward.
Front row, John.
Hey, can I comment on that, please?
Oh,
Sorry.
sorry.
I know I'm sitting over here sleeping, but I woke up. So I appreciate your comment about the report of the data that had to do with how much or how large the emissions were. I got to say, I think you were being extremely polite. When you have a report that's 80% off, it seems to me that it's a little more than just a data error, but I'll leave it at that. I would say, you know, I think there's, when CCA was passed, and I believe I understand what was trying to be achieved, but to say you can't use it for roads or bridges or highways or that, you know, there are ways that if we use that money wisely, we could reduce emissions on our roads and in bridges. And, you know, a reduction in emissions is a reduction in emissions. And if we have a road system that gets people from one place to another quicker and safer, you know, that's gonna reduce our emissions. It's the same as if you had a bridge go down and the people that use that bridge on a regular basis now have to travel 60 miles further. If you fix that bridge, you then have taken away that 60 miles. That's a reduction in emissions. It's to the degree that you want to define it here. That's the problem that we have, in my opinion. And it goes back. These guys have heard me say this, and I know they know I'm going to say it anyway. Hood River Bridge, we're going to add a bike and ped path. They tell me, oh, that's just part of the bridge. Well, we're going to build a ferry, but we're going to pay for the batteries. Well, isn't that just part of the bridge or part of the ferry? You know, putting a bike and ped path, a new one on a bridge, reduces emissions, has the opportunity to reduce emissions because of everybody that can walk or ride a bike across that bridge. That's a reduction. It may be called roads, bridges, or highways, but it's still a reduction, and it needs to be recognized as that. Thank you.
Now we'll go to John in the front row.
I've got about
One question is what you got.
one multiple part question.
We will,
All of these pertain to the CCA issue that you've been discussing here. One wanted to get the other's reply to Senator King's just last comment. Also on transfer, how much CCA money is currently allocated for the electrification of ferries? How much more do you need? How much more are you seeking? And what do you hope to accomplish in like speeding up electrification by 1 or 2 years with the transfer in if you do transfer the CCA money?
On the Hood River Bridge, we're committed to replacing the Hood River Bridge. We funded our portion of replacing the Hood River Bridge. So Senator King knows I'm committed to getting that project done. We don't need to use CCA funds because we found other funds, and we're committed to getting that work done. We're also excited the federal government is coming on board with a commitment there. In terms of the amount of funding from the Climate Commitment Act that goes to ferries, if you'd asked me on sine die, I remembered we're like 3 days before session, so my memory banks are purged on those details. We can follow up with the specific amounts, but it's roughly 25% of the cost of those new ferries because that's the incremental cost of electrifying them. But in terms of exactly what that number, maybe Chair Fry remembers, I don't remember exactly, but a couple $100 million certainly is what we're investing in. In terms of speeding up electrification, what we're now doing is constructing the vessels and then making sure the shore power infrastructure is there as the vessels arrive for them to be able to use their hybrid capabilities. So we're not trying to speed that up. I wish we could speed up the delivery of those vessels. We are sort of where we are in terms of when they arrive. I just want to make sure that the shore power is ready for them when they get here, that we can charge them on their runs. That's the current work in ferries using Climate Commitment Act funds.
Speeding it up, what do you need the extra money for?
Oh, so,
I don't know what extra money.
yeah, so thanks for the lead in. So my memory is great, but not much better than yours on the exact amount. But I'll tell you, the other part is that the terminal electrification, right, at each terminal, that's 100% paid for by CCA money. In addition, as Senator Leas is correct, 25% of the cost, that was the WashDOT estimate for the ferries. For every new ferry, it's 25%. And on the conversions, the part of the cost that was related, because other work was done on that one ferry, the part that was related to fixing up and putting in the newer system for propulsion, 100% of that was paid for out of CCA dollars. So like I said earlier, it's a lot of commitment of CCA dollars into the ferry system that otherwise arguably could be borne by other sources of fund. With respect, I just can't resist this. So clearly, but the Hood River Bridge, it might have been fully covered, but I understand that the estimate and the cost went from 500 million to $1 billion. So I think we're not fully funded on the Hood River Bridge at this point, unless some money's come in recently that I don't know about.
does anyone want to talk about just straight out, ready to stop the electrification program? Is a decision need to be made that the time frame for that has to be altered? Regardless of how it's funded, it seems to be already behind,
like
way
Jeopardy.
behind schedule.
It's kind of like ringing in for Jeopardy. Okay. Yes. Thank you, Jerry. Good question. Time is of the essence. I will refrain from using any puns. Transportation puns come very easy, like ship sailing and things like that. We have to take a hard look at this. We had a meeting in June in Seattle, the House Transportation Commission with ferries. And during that meeting, we talked about a plan that was put in place many years ago about the electrification. The cost has changed dramatically. And where are those funds coming from, whether it's CCA or otherwise, but what is it going to cost to build out the entire electrification system for the ferries? Right now, one route, just for the one hybrid that we have in place, it is actually sailing part-time on the waters. That is around 150 million, I think was the number that was told, 150 million, 200 million, something like that. We also have to think about where we're going to get the power to do that, right? So I think that this procurement process was a new process for the state, going out of state. We do still have shipbuilders here in the state of Washington that are more than capable. I think that we should have had a broader conversation about the type of boats that we were building to begin with. This all changed in 2018 when the governor changed the course of action on that and decided to electrify the fleet. I think that we should really take a hard look at the procurement process right now, this builder that's building it, the concerns that are already being brought forth on the actual delivery of the boats that are in order, the timing of that over the next 4 to 5 years, and maybe, just maybe, we should go back to the drawing board and look at what we currently have built in diesel electric. If we would have considered that path, we would have reduced our emissions probably 50% or more using new technology, and we would have reduced the cost overall on building these boats from what they are. And these are not just speculation. This is data that we have seen. The original boats that we looked at when I first started working on this were about 140 to 160 million. Now you're approaching $500 million per copy. The conversion of the Wenatchee was how many millions of dollars? Over 96 million, something like that, or the total amount on that. So if you want to talk about how we build the Hood River Bridge and take care of other bridges and everything else, you look at the cost of one aspect of doing the ferry boats electrification, doing them not electrification, what savings of money will you have, and where can you reappropriate that money in the future or reprioritize that money? So stay tuned. I'm going to be talking about this. I've actually reached out to the governor's office. I'd love to sit down with him and talk about the various plans. I'm pleased with the decision he made to pause the conversion of the other two right now to give us a little bit of time to think about that. And I think that in a bipartisan way, we really need to have a broad conversation on this.
Really, Representative Fye?
Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to go back to what I mentioned earlier about looking at the ferry system and all their capital needs. I think this is a broader question than whether you go with hybrid electric ferries or whether you go to more traditional propulsion systems. There is a lot of planned needs that the ferry system has put forward. We got to make some choices because we can't afford it all. This is even before talking about 3 new ferries. So it's in a broader context, right? One of the decisions is, do we say are the benefits worth it on electrification or not? Are the carbon savings and health savings, air quality savings worth it or not? That's just one of the questions. There are other questions. There's been conversation about whether to go to passenger-only ferries. There's been discussion about the electrification at the terminals and the sequencing of those things. There's a lot of issues out there that would be best resolved in a comprehensive way rather than dealing it ad hoc each legislative session about what are we going to do. There's a proposal about leasing vessels. There's proposals about using hydrogen at the San Juan ferry system area. So there's all these different options we have, and we need to sort through that and make a collective decision with the governor about what are the best investments and when should we do them.
Okay, I want to ask just the last couple of questions before we run out of time. I'm going to limit the answers if I can. This one is for Senator Elias. I think might be the only one I need to answer on that, but is this the year the state legislature lowers the blood alcohol level, the legal limit for drunk driving?
Well, I appreciate you asking about traffic safety because I wanted to make sure that we included that. And I think it's worth noting because of the actions of this legislature, because of the work of the State Patrol, because of the work of other law enforcement agencies, from 2023 to 2024, we saw a 10% decline in fatalities. The early data is showing that from 2024 to 2025, we've seen another 10% decline in fatalities. So we are moving the state back towards our vision of Target Zero. We need to continue on that pathway. Chair Fye and I agree that traffic safety is a priority, and we're going to continue to work on that this session. When it comes to the blood alcohol content limit, I've been on the record clearly and consistently across the last couple of years that we do need to move Washington State to the global norm, which is 0.05, and we're going to continue to work on that. We haven't yet gotten the bill through the Senate, so we're going to work on achieving that milestone hopefully this year. It is a priority. It is a huge step we could take to reduce those fatalities. But there are other things we can do as well. We've worked in a bipartisan way to make sure the State Patrol has adequate staffing. We're going to keep working on that. We've got to make sure that we get back on track towards Target Zero.
Jerry, I'll just have to say that you'll be seeing a bill that I've been working on with the Washington Trucking Association. I think Representative Barkas is going to co-sponsor this. They are willing to increase their fees in order to fund trucking education program, because as we hear about too frequently, a lot of fatalities and a lot of collisions involve trucks, large trucks, and we need to make sure that we have a good education system for those truckers.
We'll debate that, Jerry, the 0.05, but I will say that we have done, and we are all committed to traffic safety. We have done some incredible things. I think we need to continue to increase the amount of troopers on the road. We just received a report that some of the work that we've done in the traffic safety cameras and work zones are producing results, and accidents are down, and the amount of speeding through those work zones throughout our state are down. This is keeping our workers safe, keeping our people on the road safe. So this is good data that we are doing, and this is work that we've done in a bipartisan way.
Senator King.
Thank you. This is where the good chair and I disagree. I am not in favor of 0.05. Other countries have done this. They have a whole lot of different things that they do that we don't do, and I think that needs to be said. I think we need we need to get our state patrol, the numbers of our state patrol troopers increased to the level they're supposed to be at. That will do a substantial amount to reduce the number of deaths. But at this point, I don't think going to 0.05 would make that much of a difference at all.
Representative Fye, I want to start with you because you brought up an issue of the bill you're working with the Washington Trucking Association. There is an issue, the state is under fire for issuing hundreds of commercial driver's licenses to non-citizens who did not qualify for the licenses. It could even cost the state some federal highway funding. What will the legislature do in response to this? Is it more than hearings? Is there a bill?
I don't have a bill yet. I know that I presume that all four of us have been briefed on the circumstances that occurred. It's a problem in many, many states. It's not just the state of Washington, and I believe our numbers are actually quite a bit less than other states. And I know that I've been in regular contact and get updated on their fixes for the system. The way the system worked, it didn't provide a second look at the application. Was only done by one person, and so the humans make mistakes, and they're working on correcting that. So I have every confidence that they will address it. If they need more resources for it, we'll provide it. And I think that it's good that this came up, because we need to follow the law, and I think the governor's office has been cooperating fully with the federal government on achieving the objectives that they're after.
I just want to provide one clarification, too, that the issue at hand was when those credentials expire. I have not seen any evidence that someone received a commercial driver's license that wasn't trained or entitled to. The question was, does their credential expire when their work authorization expires, or does it expire at some other date? So far, that is the issue. The people that have received commercial driver licenses have passed the training, have passed the tests, have passed the medical background checks. So the question is their credential expiring at the right time? And there have been errors in that. We're going to get on top of that. But I do think the public deserves to be assured that we weren't giving commercial driver's licenses to people that didn't receive the training. They did receive the training. It's just, when does their license expire? And that's important, but it is different than handing out credentials to people that weren't entitled to have them.
It sounds like then you see this as an agency response and not a legislative response either.
So far, I mean, I do think that the budget question is real. We need to make sure the agency has the adequate resources. And we've asked all our agencies to take reductions over the last couple of years. You know, it's possible that these reductions have had an impact on these kind of workflows. If that's the case, we need to make sure they have the resources to do their job well and accurately.
You know, I think there's a really good point, though, Jerry, to Senator Lewis's point. It's very different. The work that we do in doing the budget is really hard. And when we're sitting there getting the information from the agencies, we get the paper or whatever it is, and we're doing the appropriations. So it's really up to the agencies, like telling us what bridges need to be fixed, to if DOL needs more financing for making sure CDLs don't get messed up, right? So I don't remember a conversation, they've had reductions in their staffing, but it's due to a myriad of things. I don't remember ever anything coming in my tenure that said, hey, we need 20 more FTEs at X amount of dollars for CDL enforcement. Don't remember it. That being said, the agency has been very good on this issue. We have been briefed. We have been working with them. If there is some policy aspect that needs legislation, I'm sure that we will work together to make that happen.
Okay, well, I want to thank all four of you. This is your last warm-up before next week. And so, we look forward to having conversations and watching how this plays out. We're going to end this panel here, give a chance to change seats, and the next panel will be the chairs of the budget committees in each of the four caucuses.
Thanks, Jared. Thanks, job. See you next time. Great job. I'll check with my wife. But anyway, she's honest. I know. I figured as much. Never left. Never left.
Yeah, I might follow up on our CRP spreadsheet. Doesn't want to.
I guess they can vaguely aware of it, but
The 20s, one of the biggest scandals ever to erupt in the United States, happened cross-country. It was the Teapot Dome scandal, and revolved around some oil land that was owned by the federal government, and the leases were given to private companies. People were dismayed and very distrustful. Some folks in the little town of Zilla in the Yakima Valley decided to construct a service station, a gas station, shaped like a teapot. And it stood beside the old highway there for many years, and people stopped to get gas and water and use the restrooms. and now the community has moved into town as a tourist attraction. It truly is one of my favorite places.
Thank you. Both sides. I like both sides, but both of them have their quirks.
Floor is yours.
All right. Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started here. This is the 9:30 budget panel, which I can't imagine there's any interest in this year. Sitting here today, we have Representative Tim Ormsby, who chairs the House Appropriations Committee, Senator June Robinson, who chairs the Senate Ways and Means Committee, Ranking Member Senator Chris Gildon, and Ranking Member Travis Couture of the Ways and Means Committee, or Appropriations Committee. So then just leading off, about 2 weeks ago, the governor proposed his supplemental budget, which, oh, is this better? Yeah. Sorry about that, guys. So about 2 weeks ago, the governor proposed his supplemental budget, which calls for about $2.3 billion, or pins the deficit at about $2.3 billion. It calls for about $800 million in cuts, proposes tapping into the rainy day fund for about $1 billion, closing some tax preferences to balance the budget for the current biennium. Leading off, what was your reaction to this proposal, and do you think that's an adequate starting point for these upcoming negotiations? Representative Ormsby?
Yeah, I think the governor did a responsible job of identifying the shortfall. I think the legislature will get more updated, more thorough, more in-depth information as time goes on, which will help us craft a just budget. I think my first reaction was I believe it's clear the difficult choices that are in front of us, and I think the governor confronted those initially, and that does give us a roadmap, which was his intention, give us a roadmap to resolving the shortfall.
Senator Robinson?
Thank you. Yeah, I concur with my colleague, Representative Ormsby. The governor's budget is a good starting place for us. I know that he and his team struggled with the decisions at hand, as we in the legislature will in the days ahead. But I think he made responsible decisions, and we'll take a look at all of them and make our own decisions in the next 60 days. But I think it's a great starting place for us.
Senator Gildon?
No, sure, thank you, and good morning, everyone. You know, I always try to be optimistic, even against any odds. I always try to be optimistic, and so there are a couple of things that I appreciated in the governor's budget, but there were also some things of concern, I think, is one of them that the budget does not balance over the 4-year period, which he's allowed to not balance over the 4-year period by law. But I would have liked to have seen him made an effort to balance over 4 years as opposed to just leave us out of balance. And then the other thing that caught my eye is while he did find about $3 billion in policy reductions, he also found $3.1 billion in new policy spending. And so those are the two things that really caught my eye off the bat. But I always try to be optimistic.
Representative Couture?
Thank you. Yeah, I'd agree with Senator Gildon there. I think it's not responsible. I think it's reckless to essentially try not to balance the budget. That's number one. But on top of that, it grows spending. And we have a spending addiction in this state. We don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. We have never had more revenue in the state of Washington than we do right at this very moment. And it does continue to grow, although the growth has slowed. But we grew, the governor's budget grows spending by over $1 billion. and only cuts about 85 million with an M. And, you know, they had a whole year at OFM and the governor's office last year to figure out this mess. And I view the governor's budget as wholly unserious. And on top of that, on top of not balancing, they're trying to raid the rainy day fund, roughly $1 billion, which is, you know, also reckless and irresponsible for the fiscal health of our state, our bond and credit rating, and it would leave us with less than 2 weeks of operating money. So, I mean, we're number 2 in the country for the lowest amount of reserves, and this would put us at 3% reserves. We got to do much better than that. We got to find ways to cut spending in this state and find efficiencies in our state agencies and everywhere else. Because after the outlook period, once you hit 2029, you have $1 billion for Fair Start for Kids, and you have all these other things because no hard decisions were made last session. They were just kicked down the road for a future legislature and future taxpayers to bear. And of course, now we face an unconstitutional income tax and other tax increases that will once again threaten the citizens of Washington.
The other proposal that the governor unveiled about 2 weeks ago was the income tax on millionaires, which when in effect would impact about 0.5% of Washington residents. And it, just to clarify, it's on revenue or income more than $1 million, not necessarily $1 million in assets. The governor indicated that this revenue wouldn't be available until 2029 at the earliest. And although he sounded optimistic that it could pass during this current session, he also said that voters would likely have the opportunity to weigh in at some point. Given the lack of an income tax in Washington currently, I was just wondering if you think it's feasible to pass this session, and I guess if so, why now? Representative Ormsby?
I think we need to look at our revenue options, absolutely. And the feasibility will be determined as time goes on. I don't really like delving into the finance part of it because the House has an entire committee dedicated to our finance, revenue, fees, et cetera. And I have every confidence in their ability to discern, you know, what is feasible and present to the rest of us a proposal. I think it is worth looking at. We have departed from where personal income and revenue have diverged, and going from a production manufacturing-based economy to a service-based economy, we need to make those adjustments, and that was part of the effort earlier, or in last session.
Senator Robinson?
We will see if it's feasible to pass the millionaire's tax this session or not. It is a proposal, obviously, that's been talked about for a few months. It's seems to have momentum. It will not help us with the current supplemental budget, nor really much in the 27-29, as even if we pass it this year and it goes to the voters and goes through all of that, we do anticipate that it'll be several years before we would see any revenue from it. So it's not a short-term solution by any means, but it is a potential way to keep our state revenue in, as Representative Ormsby mentioned, in line with personal income in the state, because we've really, we hear that state spending keeps increasing. Yes, it does, as personal income in the state also continues to increase.
Senator Gildon?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is a prime example of the tax-first agenda that we see coming from the majority party every single year, it seems like. We finished off last legislative session. I'll just take you on a recap. Last year, about this time, we were facing a budget shortfall, and there was a lot of talk about taxing the rich, making the rich pay their fair share. In the end, we ended up with about $12.5 billion of taxes that largely fall on the backs of working class and poor people all across our state. Now, this year, We're facing a budget shortfall, and there's talk about taxing the rich and making the rich pay their fair share. If past performance is an indicator of future actions, then I think that we know where we're going to be headed this year. And I'll say you don't fix regressive tax system by just piling on and layering more and additional taxes. If you want to be serious about fixing regressivity in our state, you need to talk about reducing the tax burden on the poor and the middle class. You just can't complain about a regressive tax system while making it more regressive. There was a quote from the Senate Majority Leader just the other day when asked about Initiative 2111 that passed in 2024 by 38-11 in the state Senate, which prohibited an income tax in our state. And he said that it was a Mary Poppins promise, pie crust promise, easily made, easily broken. I don't think any of us should ever call this a millionaire tax again, because we know where this is headed. We should call this a first slice of the pie tax, because this is just the first slice of the pie. It is going to expand to everyone eventually. The only reason that we're passing it this year, as Senator Robinson alluded to, is because they want to get it into the courts. They want to pass the income tax, let it work its way through the courts, and then eventually expand it out to each and every person in Washington state for a universal income tax. So we should never call this a millionaire tax. That's a ruse. This is the first slice of the pie tax.
Representative Couture.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just add on to that, first it was tax the billionaires, now it's tax the millionaires, and tomorrow it'll be tax the thousandaires. It'll be the rest of us. Frankly, that's why voters continuously and over time deny income taxes in the state, because they simply do not trust the fact that we will eliminate sales or B&O taxes or anything else. And as proof positive of that, we passed a capital gains income tax that's supposed to fund education, school construction. And the governor's budget takes the diminishing revenues from the capital gains tax and rates that account to help balance the budget in his reckless spending in Olympia. And so the capital gains tax went up with $1 million surcharge. The estate tax, the death tax went up again. And, at some point, you got to see the writing on the wall. And this is why voters wholly in Washington state do not trust. Well, if the legislature passes an income tax, that one, it will remain on millionaires or anyone else who is the rich. And on top of that, we're going to get capital flight, much like we got when we passed the capital gains tax. Everyone remembers Jeff Bezos moving to Florida and others on the West Coast and other states, including ours, already looking to move, the innovators, the job creators, move out of our state because of things just like this. And we've officially hit the Laffer curve. We just passed the largest tax increases in state history last session. And we are still facing multi-billion-dollar deficits. It is a spending problem. We have an addiction, and it has to be solved. And you don't solve an addiction by giving people more booze and drugs to consume. And the booze and drugs in this scenario is more revenue, more tax dollars. And the Laffer curve is simply this. If you've taxed too much, you start seeing diminishing returns. And that is exactly what we keep seeing in the economic revenue forecasts that we get all the time with the diminishing returns. So this is a false promise. Voters do not want it. It's unconstitutional. And no one trusts that it will remain on just millionaires.
Just one last question. We'll open up to audience questions. The governor has frequently talked about some of the challenges in budgeting, considering the uncertainty in federal funding to the state. In his most recent budget proposal, the governor said that there's approximately $15 billion in federal funding at risk over the next decade, I believe. From your perspective and just from your positions, what challenge does that uncertainty have, if it does, in your budgeting process? Representative Couture, we'll start on the far end.
I was expecting to go first. Can you repeat the question?
Absolutely. The governor has frequently talked about the challenges in the federal funding uncertainty on the state budget. In his most recent budget proposal, the governor said that there's approximately $15 billion in federal funding at risk for the state over the next decade or so. What impact does that have on the budgeting process for the state of Washington?
Yeah, well, first of all, the governor can, begin to start following some federal laws, and that would place us under less threat of losing federal funding. But on top of that, the biggest complaint is HR 1 and the loss of potential Medicaid funds and food assistance. For Washingtonians. But, I'll note that last session, the governor signed the largest Medicaid cut in state history. Almost, $782 million, almost $1 billion cut by the governor and the majority party out of Medicaid for our citizens, our low-income, disabled people, and seniors in this state. And the Republican budget framework that I've put together restores those Medicaid funds and all the federal matching funds, because it realizes that we could cut wasteful spending, nearly $3.7 to $4 billion in wasteful spending, and still not, destroy vulnerable people's coverage, healthcare coverage, or anything else. There's a host of problems that we have to fix in this state. And there is ways that our state can smooth the path and make sure that we responsibly implement HR 1 in this state to make sure that certain populations of people don't fall through the cracks as it relates to food assistance. And then we've also, Republicans have put together and made sure that, veterans, disabled people, homeless folks, wouldn't fall through the cracks with food assistance, but also that we would restore Medicaid. And that is something the governor's budget does not truly do. Right now we are paying hundreds of millions of dollars for illegal immigrant health care in this state while cutting nearly $1 billion from our own citizens. That's wrong. We got to do much better than that. And I haven't seen a proposal that tackles that problem. And so, we can complain about federal funding or tariffs or all sorts of things, which you will hear throughout the session, those complaints. But whatever impact tariffs may have, it is not the same impact as $9.5 billion in tax increases, over $13 billion if you include the gas and diesel tax increases and everything else in the transportation budget. That's $2 billion does not equal $9.5 billion, you guys. And at the end of the day, what the federal government is asking for in food assistance programs like SNAP is to lower its extremely high error rates and to make sure that when the federal government sends money to the states to administer for programs like SNAP, that the state is actually administering those federal funds properly. This is basic accountability. This is making sure that error rates in SNAP don't become just a data point, but that they're an actual performance metric.
Senator Gildon.
I don't think there's too much more to add there. HR 1 and tariffs and the threat of tariffs, they all have an impact on our state economy, right? No doubt. That's just the truth. But as Representative Couture also said, you've got to tell the truth across the entire economic ecosystem. You can't just call out one area while ignoring the other. And certainly, to use your number, 15 billion over 10 years, that's $1.5 billion a year. What we just passed $12 billion worth of new taxes. We just cut $750 million of Medicaid from the state. Our tort liability is going through the roof every year. If we don't do something to fix our tort liability in this state in just a couple of years, we'll be spending more in tort liability costs than we do for the University of Washington and Washington State University combined. I think that we've got to act on this. I think there's going to be a bipartisan proposal that'll be coming forward, and I'm hopeful that we'll get that through. But if you're going to talk about HR 1 and you're going to talk about tariffs, then you've also got to talk about the actions of our state that have an impact on affordability for the people of our state.
Senator Robinson.
Thank you. Well, all of us up here sit on the Economic and Revenue Forecast Council, and we've continuously heard this entire year that the reason that our revenue forecasts are below what was projected is because of tariffs and the effect of tariffs on our state economy. And that's not something I'm making up. That is what the experts are in our Economic and Revenue Forecast Council have repeatedly told us. As far as HR 1, some of the spending that my colleagues across the aisle like to criticize the governor for, is $357 million in the supplemental budget in order for the state to implement HR 1. That is a lot of spending that could be going to providing services for people that is being used to put in new IT systems in order to be able to comply with the new rules under HR 1 for both SNAP and Medicaid. So there are immediate and ongoing effects that we are having to deal with as a result of what's coming at us from DC.
Representative Ormsby.
Thanks, Mitchell. So to the crux of the question, what does it do? It provides great uncertainty for appropriators, not knowing what the federal government is going to do to provide guidance, which we have not received all the guidance we would need in order to understand the impacts of HR 1. We have been in partnership with the federal government for the entire, particularly on Medicaid, since its inception, and that partnership is in jeopardy. I feel like the administration is sweeping out the legs of the state's ability to provide critical services. And I would just note on the cut that the legislature made on Medicaid, that was in large measure administrative costs, not direct services. And no one was kicked off Medicaid under the proposal in HR 1, potentially hundreds of thousands of folks, whether it's through Medicaid or through the exchange on the subsidies, are going to be losing their health care. And unless we get federal action in the short term, that's going to provide big uncertainty.
All righty, we're going to open this up to questions. Chris Daniels.
All right, this is a little weird here. Good morning. It sounds like everybody's trying to figure out a way to save money, and in Minnesota there has been documented cases of fraud with child care centers that have been publicly subsidized. Here in Washington State, the former auditor Brian Sontag, a Democrat, has suggested there should be an outside review or audit of our funding with DCYF. In 2024, an audit here in the state suggested there were not adequate controls of $500 million that were sent and used by DCYF, and that DCYF has acknowledged in the last year an overpayment of $2 million. Polling on our air at Como TV suggests that people want an outside audit. Representative Couture has sponsored a bill 2058 to do just that. So the question for all four of you is, do you support an outside audit of DCYF? And if not, why?
Representative Couture.
Okay, I'll go first. Thank you, Chris, for that question. Yeah, it's really concerning what we're seeing in Minnesota. And of course, there's allegations and concerns of what we're starting to see with child care overpayments here in Washington State. DCYF kind of has the reverse King Midas touch. Everything they touch turns to crap. And I would say, just look at everything that they do. Child welfare, we have record amounts of child fatalities in this state. Our juvenile detention system is in shambles right now. We have no capacity, and we're actually putting adults in juvenile detention, which if we just stop that practice, we would immediately solve it. But no one has the political will here in the majority party to do that here. But now we have child care overpayments. Sometimes when you're looking at them, way over the amount, 4 times the amount that they could reasonably receive in subsidies if they were fully enrolled. But nobody has any answers. So we have a state auditor's audit from 2017, and then 2020, and then DCYF's own audit of itself, its own report of child care overpayments. But yet we can't seem to get anyone from DCYF to explain to us in the legislature what controls they put into place. And so for a long time, what it seems like to me is that, they were dishing out payments to providers and maybe asking questions later. And that problem is not just with DCYF, that is in many state agencies, as we've seen with the Community Reinvestment Program fraud, that alleged fraud that's been going on with the Community Reinvestment Program, where people in those NGOs are taking all of that money that was supposed to go to minority people and not going towards its actual purpose. I mean, just tons of NGOs in King County. So what 2058 actually does, this doesn't just target, childcare providers. It is for all public dollars going to private entities. And because we have this pervasive problem where there is no controls. And I mean, look, it took a whole thing in Minnesota and some people digging around in Washington just to actually read for the first time what the state auditor's reports were from years ago. And so we have tons and tons of reports here in the legislature. Nobody reads them. And that's a problem. We got hundreds and hundreds of them and nobody reads them. But oftentimes they're filled with what the problems and controls actually are. So what I think people in Washington state want, especially when they're being hammered with the largest tax increases in state history and facing yet again maybe another income tax or 5% Seattle Jumpstart payroll tax or whatever it may be, that is this buffet of new taxes coming here this session in Washington state, that they want to be able to, one, get measurable results, actual results for the money they spend in these programs, but then two, that they're not just being stolen from them, and then their taxes being raised to make sure that we continue to fund these, malicious areas where the money is being wasted or not being used appropriately. So we should have third-party audits because we can't expect the state agencies to grade their own homework anymore. That has failed. And so I propose 2058 to have that third-party outside audit to not just see what the measurable results are, but also to make sure that the money is being spent appropriately and that we have a non-biased entity that hasn't been appointed by Democrats for the last 40 years to actually look into the programs and not just look into their friends.
Representative Ormsby.
Yeah, I am fine with accountability and transparency. I would like to know what controls are in place. We have internal audits, the Joint Legislative Audit Review Committee that serves as that function. We also have a state auditor, and I would be interested to know what is the best combination and what Representative Couture's view of what an independent third-party auditor would look like, because we certainly have auditor functions available to the legislature and through the statewide elected state auditor in order to be able to perform those functions. So if those accountability and measurement metrics aren't adequate enough, then it would be worth looking at. I think we need to explore what is at our disposal right now, which I think, and find out what, if anything, are the shortfalls with the current system before we go down a road of, trying to uncover stuff. I have not seen any evidence of childcare fraud. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and by DCYF's own admission, they found $2 million, I believe was part of the question, which isn't a substantial amount of money. Certainly we would like that to be in the Treasury currently. I would like to understand the potential impact before making any judgment.
Senator Gilton.
Sure, thank you. So I guess a couple of things on that, right, is certainly support accountability, transparency, all of that. I think one of the things that there's two things I think I would propose is, one, the legislature cut funding to the state auditor's office just last year. I think if there's any agency that we should increase funding to, it would be the state auditor, because we're going to get a return on that investment. And I think that we should also fund them to a sufficient level where they're able to do an audit of 20% of the state agencies every year, so that we get an ongoing review to make sure that we're spending money wisely. The other thing that I think we need to do is, under current law, state agencies are required to report fraud, but individual state employees are not. I think that we should require state employees to report fraud when they come across it, and every person who's newly hired into the state should receive training saying that they are required to report fraud, as well as how to report it. So those are the couple of things that I would add.
Senator Robinson.
Thank you. I take, oversight of public resources very seriously. And of course, nobody wants fraud. Nobody wants people who are not playing by the rules to receive state funding. I look forward to working with the governor, the separately elected state auditor that the people of Washington have elected, and our agencies, as well as our legislative staff, who we are a separate branch. We do our own analysis and work. I would like to explore all the options that we currently have available for oversight, which we have a lot of potential within our system right now before we spend additional money for more audits. And I just want to let Representative Couture know that I do read legislative reports. You may think no one reads them, but I'm one of those weird people that actually reads the ones that come into my box. So I appreciate them. Thank you.
All righty. John Stang.
One question for the Democrats, one question for the Republicans. Both of them are on the income tax. Democrats, how do you design an income tax bill that would survive arguments before the Supreme Court, because it'll inevitably go there? Republicans, I want you to factor out the constitutionality issue, factor out the camel's nose in the tent issue. I make $1 million, I keep $900,000. That's not going to change my lifestyle one bit. What the heck is wrong with a tax on someone making $1 million?
Yeah, I guess I'll start that off. Yeah, I guess if you cancel out all the most important aspects of it and just look at the, the pure why should I care, it's because we have capital flight. And the capital flight costs us jobs, costs us innovation. I mean, we're a state built on innovation. We have a large tech sector that, does make incredible amounts of money, but then they turn that money around and give people six-figure jobs with 401ks and healthcare and benefits and everything else. So why would it affect, the rest of us?
I would like to challenge that. If, again, making $900,000 as opposed to $1 million, that's not going to wreck my life enough for me to leave the state if I like living in the state.
Well, I mean, to me, I don't think that matches with the evidence of what we see with people who are upset that would be subject to the tax are already thinking about moving out of this state. And similarly, moving out of California for similar things. And you know what? We're losing 48 taxpayers per day in Washington state. And while states like Florida are gaining somewhere like 400 or 500 taxpayers per day. And that's the capital flight that we see. We have a lot of people that are fleeing Washington state, and maybe not just for an income tax, but as the sum total of all of the tax increases and all of the burdensome regulations and the huge problem we have with public safety and crime. And we are one of the most unaffordable places to live. The cost of gas, groceries, rent, insurance, healthcare, you name it. Almost every measurable category, we are one of the worst in the country. And we have the highest gas prices, but our neighbors just to the east in Idaho, they have zero problem and are providing tax relief to their citizens right now. And so it's not a national problem, it is a Washington state problem. We've spent too much, and now the income tax is being proposed so that, we could cover up for budget negligence, and that's wrong.
Representative Ormsby.
Thank you, Mitchell. I think it is highly speculative, John, what would pass muster with the state Supreme Court and prior decisions, et cetera. I think it's worth finding out. What the Supreme Court will decide to do is unknown, and I think it is very specific to how the legislation is written and who it affects. I have no problem. I can look myself in the mirror and my constituents in the face if we're taxing a certain percentage of over $1 million. So $1 million goes in someone's pocket, it remains the same as it currently is under Washington State Tax Code. Over $1 million, different story. So, and as you pointed out, it is not going to change anyone's lifestyle at that level. So let's talk about the specific proposal. And we don't have one to unpack and, to thoroughly understand, but I think that is the process of creating legislation and answering all those uncertainties as we go through it. So I think the idea that we have capital flight, I have not seen any evidence of that whatsoever, and I believe that the quality of life in Washington State demands a good state budget to provide the services that our residents expect.
Senator Gildon.
Yeah, sure, thank you. I'm going to push back a little bit on this idea that capital flight's not a real thing in a number of areas, but the first thing that I'd say is this doesn't fix regressivity, right? This is just a layering of another tax, and you should probably go out and talk to a couple of rich people and get their perspective on it, and maybe that'd be a good interview for you to do. Because if you do, they're going to talk about our tax system, and they're going to talk about the entire tax system. They're going to talk about B&O taxes. They're going to talk about sales tax. They're going to talk about the gas tax. They're going to talk about the 35% inheritance tax that they're going to be liable for, and then add on a 10% income tax on top of that. The layering, the constant layering is what's going to drive the people away from our state, innovators away from our state. As Joe Nguyen, Director of Commerce, likes to say, if you want to tax rich people, you have to have rich people to tax. And we need to create an environment that attracts people to invest and innovate in our state. The other part about this is you're missing half of the equation in your question, because it doesn't just apply to rich people, it also applies to S-corps and LLCs, small businesses, which will be affected by this particular tax. So it's much more vast than the question indicates.
And I just want to add on to that we have the highest small business failure rate in the nation.
Senator Robinson.
And the question for us is around constitutionality or the decision by the Supreme Court.
The fact that it's technically, it is unconstitutional under the Constitution. How do you design it? Can you design and how do you design?
Well,
a millionaire income tax that would survive a legal challenge.
I mean, we are not the Supreme Court, so I'm not going to say that we can do that, because that's their decision, and they are the third branch of government. They get to make that ruling. Our job is to pass the best legislation that we can that meets the needs of the people of Washington, and we do the best, and the Supreme Court will make their independent decision.
All right, we have time for a few more questions. Brandy?
I do have a question.
Well, 1 second, wait for the.
I do have a question of my own, but just to follow up, Representative Ormsby, on your answer to John's question, you said you've seen no evidence of tax flight or wealth flight. Forbes estimates Jeff Bezos saved $954 million in capital gains taxes by moving to Florida. So what do you mean you've seen no evidence of tax flight?
That's one example, and I believe that if you unpack that, it was for personal reasons, not business reasons or dollar reasons. That's where he originated. He returned home. He built his wealth here in this state because of the infrastructure and ability and technical expertise that we have. My understanding is his situation was personal, not based on tax liability, but for personal reasons.
My own question, obviously there's going to be a lot of debate this session about whether you really just want a millionaire's tax or whether you want to tax everyone's income eventually. Representative Larry Springer was asked this week, have you seen the clip? I can reiterate it. He was asked this week at the Bellevue Chamber of Commerce legislative preview why Washingtonians should trust that a party that's always said it wants an income tax suddenly doesn't want one, it just wants to tax millionaires. And he said, you shouldn't trust that. He literally said, a member of your own caucus, of your own party, that Washingtonians should not trust you guys if you try to suggest that you only want to tax the income of millionaires. So do you only want to tax the income of millionaires, or are you willing to admit that eventually the plan is to tax everyone's income?
I don't have any plans. We're not counting on the millionaires portion of it, as has been described. There has to be a bill. It has to be scrutinized. It has to be marked up, and given a fiscal note. So let's focus on the policy that's in front of us, not speculate about what that means in the future. I do not have plans on that money being of help in the short term. As Senator Robinson explained, it wouldn't come in to be a benefit to the state until at least 2 years, if not longer. So it is not a short-term fix. So this whole camel's nose under the tent slippery slope argument is not relevant to the policy that will be before the legislature. That would come in the future, and it would go through the same scrutinizing and unpacking process that any legislation in any committee that has any fiscal impact whatsoever would go through that same scrutiny.
Can you respond to Representative Springer, again, your fellow caucus member's assertion that Washingtonians should not trust your caucus when they say that this is a millionaire's tax and not a road to an income tax?
I don't have any comment on that. That's the first I've heard of it. I know Representative Springer well. I'm happy to check in with him about that, but I had not heard that, and it's certainly not my opinion.
Senator Robinson, is the goal, and do you personally want an income tax in the state of Washington?
I want to do what the people of Washington support, which is taxing wealth. So I'm interested in a millionaire's tax.
So you wouldn't support down the road lowering that threshold from a millionaire's tax to an income
Today,
tax?
I support a millionaire's tax.
Tomorrow? 5 years from now?
It's tomorrow and 5 years from now, and then the question will be relevant.
Alrighty. Seattle Times, Drake Fay.
I'm curious about the idea the governor has proposed of making sure that somehow there's tax relief included in a millionaire's tax. How do we, and this is why it's a very apropos question for budget writers, how do we write that in? How do we make that a part? Is there a mechanism that you would include to ensure that there would be some tax relief if we truly are trying to make a tax system less regressive?
Absolutely. You put it in the bill. You put the tax relief in the bill.
I'd like to respond and just say that, Senator Jamie Peterson, the majority leader in the Senate, has already said about the income tax ban that was the initiative that was overwhelmingly passed, including the one he voted for. It was mentioned, I think, by Senator Gildon that he was quoted in KUOW as that was a pie crust promise, easily made, easily broken. And that's exactly the fear we have with this income tax proposal. You could promise everything in politics, but it's about what do you trust? And there isn't any trust there, and that's why voters continuously vote against that. And as I outlined before, we've already increased the threshold of the estate tax, the death tax, capital gains tax, $1 million surcharges on B&O, and everything else, right? As much as we talk about regressive taxes, the largest tax increase was the sales and B&O taxes last session. The largest tax increase in state history was the most regressive tax in state history. And we can't forget the other most regressive tax, which is the carbon tax, the CCA on your gallon of gas, 56, 60 cents. That is the most regressive tax. And the B&O is wholly unfair. So where it might sound great that, you reduce or get rid of parts of B&O and sales tax, but how are we supposed to trust people when they make pie crust promises after just voting to ban an income tax that they wouldn't tax people under $1 million?
Alrighty. Carlene at the Center Square.
So my question is for Senator Robinson or Representative Ormsby, are you hearing from constituents in your home districts that the recent increase in taxes, whether it's B&O or sales taxes, some of the stuff that's hitting somebody that just wants to teach a CPR class that has more than one person now has to pay or will soon have to pay. Are you hearing from any constituents in your districts that the tax burden is currently crushing them?
I've not heard that the new taxes on services are shutting things down. There is a concern about certainty and just getting proper guidance from the Department of Revenue on, and they're interested in doing their part, but they're uncertain and don't want to make a mistake, don't want to do it wrong, and they're still waiting guidance from Department of Revenue on what's in, what's out. And I think this is something that Department of Revenue is experiencing, didn't anticipate. These are always happens. You implement something. There are things that you hadn't anticipated for, and I think I have not heard that they're shutting things down or that it's crushing them. I've heard we want more and better information on how to comply.
And I hear from constituents and non-constituents constantly about all sides of tax issues. I've met with a lot of constituents and non-constituents over the interim about the taxes that you're talking about, I think, the expansion to sales tax on services. I think there will need to be some adjustments made to some aspects of that. I know other folks are working on bills. Taxes are not popular, not surprising, and we hear from people all the time about them.
Can I just, real quick, I'm a small business owner. I have 6 employees. I'm one of the few people in the legislature that signs the front of the paycheck and not the back, right? And I could tell you from my own personal lived experience that it is hell in Washington State being a small business owner. The B&O tax is the most unfair tax in the nation. It's not accounting for your expenses. It's not accounting for your cost of goods sold or your payroll, right? And I spend an incredible amount of money, not just in taxes with B&O and sales and everything else, but with all the other things, Washington Cares, L&I, and you name it. And it feels like a lot of these things are weaponized against small business, which is probably why we have the highest small business failure rate in the nation. We have to be more cognizant of that. And, to say that it doesn't hurt, I have a constituent of mine who's also a business owner who is moving his operation to Arizona because of the new digital advertising sales tax that was levied, was costing him over $2,000 extra a month in his business. And now we're losing not only another taxpayer and not only another good family, but another business, another small business in this state to a state with friendlier tax policy. And, as the reports have shown, our tax competitiveness nationally has spiraled, has absolutely spiraled. We used to be very competitive just, like a decade ago or less, but now we're entering near the bottom of tax competitiveness. We have some of the highest tax burden in the nation. It's just unsustainable. And all we have to do is realize that we have some of the highest amounts of revenue ever. We have $78 billion. You just have to prioritize the spending and spend it correctly. And you have to find efficiencies in government to make sure that people are actually getting what they pay for.
All right, we have about 9 minutes left, so maybe 2 more questions. Bill at the State Standard.
Yeah, 2 things. So first, a follow-up for Senator Robinson on Josh's question. When you say put the tax relief in the bill, can you elaborate a little bit on how that could look? And then second question for Senator Robinson and Representative Ormsby. Without further tax increases, do you see the state budget as on a sustainable trajectory, or are we going to be back here year after year having this conversation if more taxes aren't put in place?
The first part of your question, I mean, you literally write into the bill language what tax, whether it's sales tax reduction or property tax reduction, whatever it is. I'm not writing the bill, but it would be, I mean, it's possible to write all those reductions into the bill.
I guess I'm saying, are there any conversations going on about what specific taxes there might be relief with in that bill? I know you're not writing it, but just,
There are conversations. I think the governor in his press conference, when he talked about his support for it, mentioned some specifics that he would, possible. There are definitely conversations about that happening. And then what was the next part of your, sustainability. It's a matter of what services do the people of the state of Washington want from their state government? And then how are we, what are we able to provide and how are we going to provide them? I believe that people of Washington want good schools. They want behavioral health services. They want health care that's affordable and accessible. They want childcare to be available when they need it and affordable and accessible. I think we're going to need to grapple with what is the role of the state in providing all those services that the people expect government to provide for them, and how do we pay for it? I know folks like to say we just need to cut spending and find efficiencies. I would like to know exactly what spending people would like to cut, and to the extent that it makes up for the deficit that we're seeing. It is challenging to cut billions of dollars out of the state budget every year, and people feel those impacts. And those are all decisions that we are going to need to grapple with this year and in the years ahead.
Senator Gildon?
Yeah, I can just do a follow-up. Senator Robinson mentioned, some specific items that we could find some efficiencies on, and I'd just like to give you a few examples, if I may. And the first thing I think we actually should do is we should limit the rate of growth of state government and tie it to some index, whether that's the median wage worker growth and then, or whatever the index is, and then any revenue that the state takes above that index could be returned back to the people in some form of tax refund. But some of the specific things that we can do, I'll give you some examples. Paid family and medical leave. We found out recently that there are over 300,000 hours of paid family and medical leave that were paid to state employees who were also concurrently on sick leave. So they're taking sick leave and at the same time taking paid family and medical leave. That's 300,000 hours that we found just last year. I don't think that should be the case. I don't think that was the intent of the bill. I think the intent of paid family and medical leave is that once your sick leave is exhausted, then you can take your paid family and medical leave. The state Senate does not allow employees to do that, but the executive branch agencies do allow that. I think we can fix that, and that's going to save some real money. Spoke last year extensively about concurrent enrollment in Medicaid. About 130,000 people are concurrently enrolled in Washington State Medicaid and in Medicaid in another state. Those are wasted dollars. The monthly premiums that we're paying every month are wasted dollars that we should be saving. Representative Couture spoke about juvenile rehabilitation to age 25. If you look at it from just a strictly monetary perspective, it costs $260,000 per year per individual to house someone in our juvenile rehabilitation facilities. Conversely, it costs only $60,000 per year to house them in the Department of Corrections. And when you have people over the age of 18 who are taking up bed spaces in these juvenile rehabilitation facilities, it's resulted in overcrowding, and it has defeated the purpose of juvenile rehabilitation, which is to rehabilitate the juveniles, but they're not getting any rehabilitative services because of the overcrowding. But you're saving $200,000 per year per individual if you just make that move. Those are a couple of the things that we can do, as well as we need to right-size government. If you look at some of our agencies, you'll see middle management has just increased over 100% over the last few years, but the number of frontline workers has remained stagnant. I think we should reduce some of that middle management, hire more frontline workers, so we can provide better direct services to the people of our state.
Representative Ormsby.
I'd just like to address the sustainability issue and on the bill itself, as Senator Robinson said, it will have rates in the bill. So it will be able to be unpacked. It will be able to be quantified. Relative to sustainability, I think we do have a sustainability issue given our tax structure, which has been decoupled with personal income. 15, 17 years ago, say prior Great Recession, the tax code was well in line with personal income. Those have decoupled given the historic changes. The economy has changed. Things are more expensive now. We have more people, we have inflation, we have abdication of our federal partners in their assistance on healthcare and food particularly. So that gives us pause, and we're going to need to balance this budget. There is no alternative, but looking for ways to do that responsibly without injuring people, without affecting the affordability issues that they're faced with in terms of food and other things. I think it's time to have a serious conversation about structural adequacy.
Just really quickly, and to add on to what Senator Gildon was saying about, some cuts. House Republicans recently proposed a Republican budget framework. It includes no new taxes, nearly $4 billion in cuts, and none of which affect vulnerable populations, and it fixes a lot of the problems of the past, like Medicaid and food assistance. We don't cut a single dime from schools. We don't cut a single dime from healthcare. We don't cut a single dime from public safety. No essential services for vulnerable people. So we have laid out a roadmap. It's published on our website. Anyone can read it right now. It's, 15, 20 pages long. It's very detailed. But there is a way to do it. You reduce, like Senator Gildon said, you reduce the scope and size of government, and you find where the waste is. And it's actually not that hard if you're actually trying to look for it. So we've put forth a responsible framework that I hope the majority can at least look at some of it and take some of it seriously and implement some of it, because I think that our state will be much better off if we work together in the budget room and Republicans are allowed to sit in the budget negotiations with the Democrats, and we have the ability to talk through some of these things. I think that's what the people of Washington State want. They want bipartisan cooperation. Not everyone will probably get what they want, but at least we'll all have a greater perspective in hearing each other's views. And I think that I've put that out there. It's public on the website. I encourage you all to look at it. Pick it apart if you want, but that to us is a responsible first opening salvo to solving this problem and having true structural budget reforms and accountability so that we don't continuously face multi-billion-dollar deficits every single year and continue to have this conversation.
We have maybe 2 more minutes left, so one last quick question for Simone.
Hi. Critics have described the $1 million threshold on the so-called millionaire's tax as arbitrary. So Senator Robinson and Representative Ormsby, could you respond to that criticism and also talk about why you would support a tax for those earning $1 million and not, say, $900,000 to bring up John's number?
I think that's yet to be determined, right? So the threshold that's been discussed is $1 million. I think everyone has an idea in their mind what that encompasses, and I think it will be, how much money does that bring in? There's just a lot of decisions that need to be made, and that threshold, may appear arbitrary, is going to very much have to do with the benefits of the revenue that the state would see, and not in the short term, but in the out years. And so that also allows time to make adjustments to make that number less arbitrary and actually fund state government and provide affordability to our residents.
All righty, we're just about out of time. Any quick responses, Senator Robinson?
People of Washington have been very clear through recent initiatives that they support taxing wealth in this state in exchange for clean air, clean water, good schools, childcare, early learning, and that is what I think this proposal is attempting to match, what we've heard from the people of Washington.
Senator Gildon, briefly.
No, well, thank you. This has been a good conversation. We're going to have a lot more coming out during session. And I just ask that all of you say a little prayer for the people of Washington State, because we need it.
All righty, Representative Couture, any final remarks?
No, thank you everyone for being here and thank you for your interest. And, I look forward to finding a solution that doesn't include new taxes in the next session. I look forward to working with my colleagues across the aisle, Senator Robinson and Representative Ormsby, to make sure that we do the best thing for the people of Washington.
All righty, that concludes this panel. We will have our leadership panel coming up in about 2 minutes.
In the summertime, you'll see rafters on the river really enjoying the water. And through every season, you'll see different types of activities. People enjoying this scenic and beautiful valley. It's truly one of the most beautiful drives in our state, and it most certainly is one of my favorite places. Question always comes up. Where can you get the finest burger in Washington State? Who makes the best hamburgers? Well, I've tried them all. I've been to the Pickwick in Fife, the Iceberg in Walla Walla, the Lakeview at Lake Chelan, even to Fat Smitty's at Discovery Bay and Big Tom's here in Olympia. They're all good. So what's your favorite burger joint in Washington State? I'll tell you this, every single one of them, my favorite places, my favorite burgers. Send us your nomination.
Support for My Favorite Places is provided by the Washington Hospitality Association and by Weatherly Inn, senior living where it's home and your family.
Washington State is an outlier in terms of its liability laws around condo construction. That's led to a lot of home builders getting out of the market to build the condos because it's so expensive. There's a lot of risk.
We need to hurry up and get a little bit more people in shelter, permanent shelters. And kid homes seems to be an obvious natural fit to that.
This is really one of the most incredible places in the state of Washington. This is Lime Kiln State Park on the west side of San Juan Island. It's from this location that people can come and watch orcas or killer whales right on the shoreline. You could virtually stand above on the rocks and look straight down on the whales. In 1984, the Reagan administration transferred this location to us for $1. I think it was the best buy in the history of the state. This is truly one of the most incredible places in the state of Washington. Kids and adults alike just come here every day of the year to watch whales in the wild. Right here in the west side of San Juan Island, Limekiln State Park. It truly is one of my most favorite places in our entire state.
Just like a house, always a little behind schedule.
The floor is yours, Sean.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Shauna Soursby. I'm with the Seattle Times. Here with us, we have a leadership. This is Speaker of the House, Lori Jenkins. This is Senate Majority Leader, Jamie Peterson. House Minority Leader, Drew Stokesbury, and Senate Minority Leader, John Braun. So I guess to start off, let's just go ahead and talk about your priorities for each caucus this session.
Thank you, Shauna, and thanks everybody for being here. You know, I think the 2026 session, we definitely start off with some pretty significant headwinds. Most significantly, the harmful policies that have been passed by the federal administration, the federal government, and the attacks of the federal government on states like Washington. I think, you know, President Trump's tariffs are causing much higher inflation in the state. They're causing a lot of uncertainty because they go back and forth daily, so there's no way for our business community to really plan for or around them. And they're causing greater prices for our families here in Washington state. So everything from food to clothing to furniture to cars to lumber, you name it. So there's nothing we can do about the tariffs, but there are things that we can do to help Washingtonians. We can, you know, come together and try to get good policy done, make sure that at every chance we have to push back on bad federal policy that we can do that, where we can have an effect on affordability for Washingtonians, we can work on that, and our own budget challenges here that have been, you know, greatly contributed to by the federal government. Nonetheless, we are going to have to address our own budget challenges. So those, I think, will be our biggest priorities this session.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Our priorities are in the Senate Democratic Caucus are largely aligned with what you heard from the speaker. I would say, number one, we are going to do everything that we can to protect people in our state from a really malevolent, hostile federal government. And, you know, aside from the tariffs and all of the bad effects on the economy, we see attacks on immigrants, really weaponization of the military and the National Guard to oppress people all over the country. We see attacks on transgender people all over the country. We see attacks on science and on research. So we're going to be looking for every opportunity that we can to make sure that vulnerable people are protected, to make sure that science and healthcare are protected, including supporting the West Coast Health Alliance and the scientifically based standards in terms of vaccines. So that's number one priority for us. Second priority is to face the current budget shortfall that we have, to overcome that, and to try to turn the ship so that we're in a better position in 2027 and going forward in terms of the long-term stability of our state budget. And then the third priority is really about everyone else's budget and the affordability crisis that we're facing. So we'll continue the historic work that we've been doing on trying to increase housing supply, some exciting bills there to continue that pattern. We'll also be working on what we can do to help with childcare and healthcare, other major expenses that folks face, because we know that for a lot of our citizens, we are facing really significant challenges in terms of affordability. So those are the three big focuses for us in this session. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. Washington State House Republicans are going to be focused on this Washington far more than the other Washington. We ran to represent our constituents in this Washington, not the other Washington. This Washington has problems that need solving, and we're going to be focused on providing solutions for the problems facing this Washington. There's a lot of problems that we're facing: rising crime rates, lowering educational outcomes, but the biggest one by far is the unaffordability crisis that continues to confront Washingtonians every morning, every day. This is not the federal government's fault. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the second highest gas price of any state in the country. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the fourth highest grocery prices of any state in the country. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the fourth highest housing prices of any state in the country. Tariffs don't explain why Washington has the seventh most costly child care of any state in the country, or the third highest cost of living of any state in the country. Washington is uniquely expensive compared to nearly every other state. That is not a result of the federal policies. Federal policies don't target Washington. Washington state's policies target Washington. It is a result of decades of single-party governance that has resulted in Washington becoming more and more unaffordable. So House Republicans will be focused on providing relief to ordinary Washingtonians, things like reducing the sales tax on prepared food, reducing the sales tax on groceries, finding ways where Washingtonians can find some relief in their wallets. Part of this is also connected to the looming budget crisis facing the state. When we were here before you about a year ago, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of a $10 billion budget deficit. Despite raising $10 billion in new taxes, we yet again have another multi-billion-dollar budget deficit. And continuing to raise taxes will only make Washington more affordable, will only drive more jobs out of state, and introduce us into a perpetual cycle of continually trying to raise new taxes to be able to afford services that we shouldn't be in the business of providing in the first place. And all the while, Washingtonians are struggling to make ends meet. So House Republicans will be focused on one thing: making sure Washingtonians can continue to afford to live here in Washington.
Good morning, everyone. John Braun, thanks for being here. I'm going to just start by saying I agree with everything that Representative Stokesbury just said. And we have, you've heard me talk over the last several years, our focus has been affordability, public safety, education. I think that is still true, but the gap between public concern on affordability and all the other ones, which are also important, has grown to the point where the priorities are really affordability, affordability, affordability. And Representative Stokesbury is absolutely correct that Washington stands apart from the rest of the country as a result of the policies put in place by the majorities here in the legislature, whether it's food or gas or housing, childcare, healthcare. And across the board, those prices are being driven up by policies here in the state of Washington. And we need to find ways to push back on that. And so you're going to see Senate Republicans on every bill talk about how does this affect affordability in the near term, economically, but also in the medium and long term, how it affects our economy long term, how it affects opportunity long term for our citizens, and the cost that goes with that. Associated with that, we've seen a lot of talk in the news recently about potential or suspected or certainly credible suggestions that there may be fraud in some parts of our government. You've heard about the mortgage assistant program where we had very clear double dealing. You've heard about recent news having to do with daycares. And that, I want to be clear, that's been in the news a lot more lately, but that's an issue that has been talked about in state government for many years, is brought to us repeatedly by folks inside state government saying they have concerns about misuse and we should investigate. And frankly, you have not done a good enough job at doing that. We owe it to our citizens to do that. When you talk about affordability, that also means spending state resources wisely, carefully, and we owe it to them. Whether these allegations are true or not true, they deserve investigation. If they are true, there should be consequences. If they're not true, people need to understand that so we maintain trust in government. Super important if we're going to move our state forward and get back to a place where people can afford to live and live well here in the state of Washington. We're going to have to take that on. Thank you.
One quick follow-up for Senator Peterson. You mentioned some housing bills. Can you expand on those a little bit and talk about those a little bit more?
Sure, I'll just start with one. Senator Alvarado has a bill that I think came out of the roundtable, actually, and some work that Challenge Seattle has been doing, essentially requiring cities to allow areas that are zoned like commercial, so think underused sort of strip malls, to be converted into residential uses. You know, if you think about it, in those areas largely have good utilities already provided. There are, by definition, roads there. In addition, there's often transit service for them. So they are perfect places for infill dense residential development. And I think the Lieutenant Governor's task force as well identified that that is a potential way very quickly to bring online a chunk of the undersupply of housing that we are faced, really help stabilize prices by increasing supply.
The public defense system is notably strained currently, and public defenders warn lawmakers in December that this could lead to further public safety issues. I'm wondering if there's any appetite from any of the caucuses this year to address the public defense system, and if there's anything specific you think could be done to address the issue.
I guess I'll just say, I mean, one of the things I'm very pleased about is actually the crime rates are falling in Washington State. All the data that we're getting says that both violent and property crimes are going down at a very significant rate, as they are all across the nation and have been since 2023. So I think that's good, and that will be helpful in this realm. The primary, I think, issue in the public defense arena is the caseload standards that the Supreme Court has adopted. So it's really a financial investment that we have to consider making. This is a challenging budget year, so will we be able to make progress on that? What kind of progress will we be able to make? I think is still a question to be answered, but it certainly is something. I think you all just talked to the budget teams. I'm not sure if you asked them about it, but I know it will be something on their minds as they go through negotiating the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. This is an important problem we need to solve, and an important component in maintaining a functional criminal justice system. You know, just like you can't send someone to jail if there's not a police officer on the street to arrest them, you also can't send somebody to jail if they can never get a trial because they don't have an attorney. So we need a well-functioning system. It does cost money, as the speaker has said. I think this is a priority of House Republicans. I think every year, as long as I can remember, a House Republican has had a bill to try to find a creative way to drive funding to solve this problem. The speaker is right. We have a limited set of dollars, and budgets need to prioritize those dollars wisely. I think Republicans would highly prioritize public defenders to make sure that the criminal justice system is working well.
I'm going to agree in large part. We're definitely an issue we should prioritize and we can address within our means. The caseload issue from the state Supreme Court is going to force us to do that sooner rather than later. So hopefully sooner. This is something Senator Torres and our caucus has been working on for several years, well before the current budget crisis. So it's not a new issue. It's an issue we'll continue to push on. I will say that while we have seen the crime rates come down, and I think everybody could agree that's a good thing, there is some genuine concern concerned that that's not all entirely because crime has reduced. It's also a result of failure on reporting. Reporting is really suffering based on the quality of data we're seeing is not good. And the other thing I'd say is even if it is accurate, which I think we should be cautious there, it's still historically high. So we have a lot of work to do on public safety, and for that reason alone, this should be a priority.
I guess I will say the counties for many years have faced a structural budget problem. We are facing that now, finally. But for counties where, 65, 70% of their revenue comes from property tax, and where property tax for base operations of counties has been constrained to grow at no more than 1% for the last 20 years, we're seeing the effect of that in terms of the entire criminal justice system, prosecutors, defenders, courts. And that's the context in which we have this pressure that's led to the change in caseload standards. In the longer term, I mean, I think we have some real issues to face about whether we're going to have the state take on that responsibility. From my perspective, the better thing, and I'm working on some ideas in that area, but the better thing would be for us to fix the revenue picture for counties and local governments so that they can continue effectively to handle this long-term problem that they have.
All right, I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. John?
Brian Haywood turned in his two initiative petitions. I'm assuming they probably have enough signatures to pass muster to go to the legislature. Do either one of those petitions have any chance of passing the legislature this session? And if not, what does everyone think of their chances of passing in a November referendum?
Well, I guess I think they have been provisionally certified. They haven't been fully certified. That's the last that I heard, both of them. Just so folks know what we're talking about. The first one repeals the expansion of parental rights that the legislature passed last year and repeals the clarifications that we adopted and will return back to an earlier version, which with some slimmed down parental rights. And I guess my commentary really to a much less clear set of laws. So that's what the voters will have to decide when it gets to the ballot. And then the second one will be a very stark decision for, I think, voters in this state, is whether or not they want to subject every girl who's over 12 years old in this state who wants to participate in sports to an invasive genital examination in return for making sure that transgender girls, which we've had less than a dozen or so over the last decade in Washington state sports, do not participate. That'll be the question voters will be asked. I don't think that we'll be taking action in the House on it, and I think voters will have the chance to decide. And I don't think at this point, I'm not here, nor do I know if I'm authorized ethically to give predictions on outcomes of that. But that's I think a question that voters will decide.
The Senate Democrats are 100% aligned with what the Speaker said. I am certain that we will not be passing either of those initiatives, and I think it's unlikely that we'll hear them. I think they'll be up to the voters to decide.
Okay, just to challenge one thing, and then I want the opinions of the other two. Is a genital check, does the language actually call for a genital check? Is someone going to actually pull open the front of a girl's shorts and check what they're packing?
I actually think it's more extensive than that, John. It's an examination. It's not.
No, it is not.
Yeah. So,
Can we real
pretty significant.
Yeah,
just press back on that, because even Como News has debunked that lie that's been repeated over and over, and even the Washington State Department of Health, the Association for Pediatrics, every major medical institution in the state says this is part of a regular well exam and a physical exam for student athletes, that they have to have a physical examination. So who are you accusing of potentially inflicting improper genital exams on girls? Are you suggesting doctors are doing this? Are you suggesting coaches are doing this?
I'm suggesting that the initiative requires this. And so your statements and your position on the initiative will be something that the voters can take into account. And, I mean, you can make your political case on it. That's my interpretation of the initiative is what I've said, and I think that there are plenty of folks who've looked objectively at the initiative, and that's what it would require.
The WIA already states that student athletes are required to undergo a physical examination every other year if they'd like to participate in sports. So they already require it, so I guess I've heard...
Well, then I guess the initiative isn't necessary.
Well, the issue is they'd have to attest to whether it's a biological boy or a biological girl, which their pediatrician would be able to do easily. So I'm confused, I guess, why that line keeps getting pushed. If the Legacy News, I mean, you can accuse me of having an opinion on it, I do, but even Legacy News has debunked what you're saying, and I've heard from parents who are concerned that you're pushing this lie suggesting that their student athletes are going to be molested or subject to genital exams. It's a very strange
I never used that term,
But that's kind
Ms.
of what
Cruz. I never used that term. What I said was that there would be invasive medical exams, and that's exactly what the initiative authorizes and does. It's what it does.
Okay, let's get back to John's initial question for Stokesbury. We'll start with you.
You guys have anything you want to throw in?
Yeah, you know, obviously I lack the votes in my caucus to unilaterally force any particular outcome, but I do think regardless of one's opinions on the matter, I think we owe it to the voters and the people of Washington and the 400,000+ individuals who signed these initiatives to consider them. It's also our constitutional obligation. The state constitution is very clear that initiatives to the legislature shall take precedence over all other matters. And we just heard that there is a fundamental dispute over what the language does, to what extent it changes current law, to what extent is mandated. What better place to have these debates and bring in experts than to hold hearings? So, Madam Speaker, I hope that we hold hearings on these initiatives so that we can hear from the WIAA, so that we can hear from pediatricians, so that we can hear from parents, so that we can hear from student athletes to understand to what extent the initiative would change the requirement for physical examination versus to what extent it would simply change the rules for who's eligible to compete in girls' sports. We live in a beautiful system of representative democracy, and what better chance to hash out these debates than to hold hearings on the bills and hold debates on the bills in accordance with the state constitution, which says these initiatives shall take precedence over all other matters we consider. So I think we should hear them and debate them. The legislature, you know, there's 98 of us in the House, 49 in the Senate. We'll choose whether to pass them now. If not, it'll go to the voters who will get to decide. But I and I think every other Republican will gladly say that parents should be more involved in schools and that girls' sports should be for girls.
Okay, I just want to challenge that. The second one, the parental right things, has a very strong transgender subtext to it. Both Senator Peterson and Representative Jenkins, they spent many years trying to get marriage equality and probably other rights that I can't think of right at this moment for people of their orientation. Why in the heck would they be sympathetic toward a hearing or doing anything regarding taking rights away from transgenders? It's
Well, I don't think we're taking rights away from transgender children any more than my right was taken away to not play girls' tennis. I don't have a right to play girls' tennis. I played boys' tennis when I was in high school.
They had a right to get married, and they did not.
I think that's a pretty strong false equivalency there, John. Nobody's taking rights away here. We simply the supporters of the initiative simply want to keep girls' sports fair and allow girls to play girls' sports and have biological boys play boy sports. Whether we like it or not, there's a fundamental genetic difference between boys and girls. That's why we have boys and girls sports. Even if you accept the current science that gender is a social construct, biology is not a social construct. Biology is biology, and that's why we delineate between boys and girls sports. So this isn't about taking away anybody's rights any more than it is about, nobody said 50 years ago when we started creating girls sports, nobody thought we were taking away boys' rights. We're not taking away rights here. And with respect to the parents' rights initiatives, we're simply clarifying and insisting that parents have a right to know what's happening with their kids. Kids belong to their parents, not to the state. This has nothing to do with whether or not kids are allowed to become transgender or undergo a transition. It simply says that parents should be informed of things that are happening with their kids at school. I think that's pretty fair, and I think most parents in Washington would want to know what's happening with their kids at school.
Okay, we really need to move on to some other questions. Chris?
Do you want me to wait for the mic?
Go ahead.
Let me ask about another non-controversial issue. The measure that's now been floated, an amendment to the Washington State Constitution that, if passed, would allow mid-cycle redistricting of Washington State, following the lead of other states, and it would go to the voters if approved. I'm curious to hear from the Democratic caucus, since this is sponsored by 2 Democrats, if you support the idea of early redistricting of Washington State.
Yeah, I think that if you look at the comments that Majority Leader Fitzgibbon has already given to the press, he acknowledges that when he filed this, that it would start a good conversation and actually help to educate the public about the challenges of doing any changes to our redistricting plan in Washington State. Just to back up a little bit, I would never have wanted to do this, no, historically, but when you have a president who has pushed mid-cycle redistricting in like a dozen states across the country to try and gain an advantage mid-cycle, there are very few tools that are left to move forward. So I think it will be a good question. It will be a good discussion to help voters understand that in Washington, you can't just do, for example, what California did or what some other states have done. We would require a constitutional amendment with a 2/3 majority vote. And so I think that really what this calls into question is, of my Republican colleagues, do they support the mid-cycle redistricting that's been happening all around the country? Do they support that, or do they not support that?
Well, like I said at the beginning, I was elected to solve Washington's problems. I certainly was elected to solve Texas's or California's problems. Never lived in either of those states. I'm not elected to the legislature there. I don't really have much of an opinion on what those other states do. I do care about what we do here in Washington. The prime sponsor of this legislation was asked over the summer if Washington would consider mid-cycle redistricting, and he said it is not on the table for us. 6 months later, he has introduced a bill to do just that. So I hope the public remembers when Democrats say later this session that the income tax will only ever apply to millionaires, that Democrats have not always kept their word. In this case, it took the Democrat majority leader 6 months to go from saying redistricting mid-cycle is not on the table for us to proposing a constitutional amendment to do just that. In every election, every statewide election this cycle, this decade, no Democrat got more than 60% of the vote, yet they hold 80% of the state's congressional seats. To do mid-cycle redistricting to get that ratio up to 90 or 100% would suggest that democracy is not on the line, as the majority leader says, unless your definition of democracy is that of Saddam Hussein and Vladimir Putin. But I don't think that Democrats need Hussein or Putin-like numbers to stay in control of this state. I think that voters are very well served by our current constitutional, bipartisan, voter-approved system, and I don't support any changes to it.
I do not support mid-cycle redistricting. My position is consistent with what I said in the summer. I do think if you look at the train wreck that was the 2021 redistricting process, I'm afraid I have to disagree slightly with my colleague from the 31st district and say that I think that there are some important revisions to the process that we ought to consider. Some of those are just statutory changes that we could make about the deadlines and about transparency in the process. can certainly consider revisions in the structure of the process as well, but those would have to be bipartisan, broadly agreed bills. And I don't think that this is one that would have that support, so.
Senator Peterson, you said at the beginning that apologize. Senator Peterson, you said at the beginning that one of the key priorities for Senate Democrats would be to make sure science is respected. Can you acknowledge that there are biological differences between men and women that would give boys a physical advantage over girls in athletics?
No, I don't think I could say that definitively. First of all, I'm not I don't have the scientific expertise to be able to weigh in on that. Based on what I know, many of the kids who participate in athletics who are transgender are taking puberty blockers, are taking hormones that probably change the scientific balance about competitiveness. So I don't have the tools or the training to be able to weigh in and offer a scientific conclusion about that. But I think that there is some reason to be skeptical of that claim. Thank you.
Would you be willing to make that a requirement?
We need to move on. Sorry, we need to move on. Bill?
Yeah, so, sorry, just first, just a quick one circling back to the initiatives. Can Speaker Jenkins and Majority Leader Pearson, can you just confirm that neither chamber will hold hearings on either initiative? Is that correct, or do you plan to hold hearings?
There's no plan to hold hearings in the House.
And there is no plan to hold hearings in the Senate.
And then the other question I had is on the income tax and the possibility of building some form of tax relief into that legislation. The governor put some ideas out there that had to do with the sales tax. Do either of you have preferences for how that tax relief component might look, and will it be built into the bill itself?
Well, thank you for asking that. Yes, I have some pretty strong preferences about that, although, ultimately it's 75 people, the 50 in the House and 25 in the Senate, that will have to come to some agreement about that. And the Speaker and Representative Fitzgibbon and I have had some robust conversations about that. An idea, so first of all, I would say I share a big idea with the governor, which is that we ought to use a significant portion of the proceeds to provide a permanent, stable funding source for the Working Families Tax Credit. That is a fantastic program that has enjoyed bipartisan support, and that right now is just coming from resources in the general fund. I think having a great way to pay for that and provide an offset to our uniquely regressive, bad tax system that we've had for the last 90-some years would be a good use of proceeds. Second, I would love to see us take a portion of the proceeds and essentially put it in at what we receive, say 10% of what we receive each year, and then put that in an escrow that would reduce the aggregate state property tax for the following year, and then have the auditors put onto, or the assessors put onto the property tax statements for everybody, reduction due to millionaire tax, X $100 or whatever it is, depending on their tax situation. So, those are a couple of ideas. I think we have also had discussions about either very targeted sales tax relief, so taking sales tax off of goods like diapers or over-the-counter medicines, or a broader tax relief, although I think, probably that would be a relatively modest reduction in the sales tax. We've talked about gas tax. We've talked about both the small business taxes that the governor raised and potentially rolling back some of the B&O tax changes that we made in the last. So we have a wide variety of options and I think there will be robust discussion about it. The big picture, though, is that I absolutely believe that a significant portion of the proceeds, if that idea moves forward, will need to be dedicated to reductions of regressive taxes. Thank you.
All right, any other questions? Simone?
Hi. In the previous panel, there was some discussion of the millionaire's tax potentially leading to capital flight. So Senator Peterson and Speaker Jenkins, could you respond to concerns that this would drive innovators and jobs from the state, ultimately backfiring in terms of revenue?
Well, I guess I'll just say that any tax we ever pass, that's the argument about it. So I think the focus of the millionaire's tax is really to address our regressivity in this state and to start shifting to make our tax structure more fair. I talked to a lot of people who, would likely be subjected to it, and they actually have as much of an investment in fairness as folks who are paying at the low end of, in our state right now, like the poorest 20% of Washingtonians pay 4 times as much per dollar in taxes as the wealthiest 5% do, right? People recognize that as unfair, and they want to achieve fairness there. So, this is certainly things that we will work with the business community on, talking through that, talking through the effects, talking through what reductions actually address regressivity for them the most, as well as, talking to folks about what individual regressivity is, what kind of effects that's having. So I don't think to jump to that is really the way to go. We certainly have had over cap gains. We've had like one big taxpayer leave the state, which everyone knows who that is, and move to Florida. But for the most part, folks have stayed and have been very participatory in the work that we've been doing on our tax reforms.
The other thing that I'd like to say about context is that we have just lived through a year with the passage of H.R. 1, where we have this dramatic contrast between significant tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires on the one hand, and then dramatic attacks on benefits that go to poor people on the other hand, right? And I think that people in our state, including very patriotic, wealthy people, are feeling that and are wanting to help make sure that that's not the dynamic in Washington, right? The second thing that I would say is that when you think about actual behavior that's driven by tax system, what may lead to real changes in terms of people's choices that they make about where to reside are when you become an outlier state, right? And so if you think about the ways in which Washington is an outlier, I think in hindsight, we made a mistake this last year by creating a top marginal rate for the estate tax that is so much higher than the rate in any state. And anecdotally, at least, I have heard that there are people who, because of that, are making a decision to change their residence. I guess time will tell if that happens, and we may have an opportunity to reconsider that in this session or in coming sessions. When you think about the income tax, 41 states have some form of a personal income tax. 43 states have some form of income tax. If you look at the top marginal rates for various states, and certainly our main comparator states, whether that's Oregon, California, Colorado, Hawaii, Illinois, New York, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Connecticut, Massachusetts, I think what you'd find is that nearly all of them have a top marginal rate that is higher than the 9.9% that we've been talking about. So yes, it is true that there are places that have no income tax. And if someone decides that that's really the way that they want to organize their life, they have an opportunity to avoid it by changing their domicile and living there. But for most people, you know, aside from the fact that I think a lot of them would be happy to pay their fair share and supporting the services in the state, having a robust, good safety net, having a strong public school system, strong higher education system. I don't think that there is a strong likelihood that that they're going to change their domicile on that basis. And I think, to the speaker's point, that's what we've seen with capital gains, where we established a rate, a tax rate that is consistent with or lower than what we see in most other states.
I'm glad Senator Peterson sort of alluded to the fact that there's still a handful of other states without an income tax, because I think that provides a helpful data point for us. Population growth amongst the states with no income tax, which includes Washington for now, is 82% higher than it is for states with an income tax. That's according to U.S. Census data. So the data clearly shows that there really is a connection between where people choose to live and whether or not an income that state has an income tax. 82% greater population growth in non-income tax states compared to income tax states. That doesn't just manifest itself in where the people land, it manifests itself in the state's economy. GDP growth of non-income tax states is 28% higher than it is in states with income tax. Personal income growth is 67% higher among states with no income tax than it is in states with an income tax. And job growth is 28% higher in states without an income tax than it is in states with an income tax. So the question is not just do we want to attract people or not, it's do we want to attract jobs and economic growth or not. I think we do, and this should matter for everybody, regardless if you're a Republican or a Democrat, because all of the things that we've talked about so far today, public defense spending, public health spending, requires a robust economy and a robust tax base to fund all that. Washington has one of the highest average starting teacher salaries of any state in the country. We have the most generous college financial aid package of any state in the country. We've got one of the most robust Medicaid systems in the country, both in terms of who we cover and what is covered. All of that is possible because of the economy that exists in this state, because companies like Boeing decided to call Washington home 100 years ago. Microsoft called Washington home 50 years ago. Amazon called Washington home 25 years ago. We have all sorts of major employers here, from Starbucks to T-Mobile to Expedia to Costco, that call Washington home in part because of our economic and tax policy. And if we are too disruptive to that, we not just drive those jobs out of state, we prevent the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs from locating in Washington, and they're going to choose places like Austin and Miami instead. And not only are we going to be caught in this cycle of always trying to expand the income tax to keep up with state spending, but we're going to run out of money to fund all these programs that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, so staunchly think that we need. So I think we need a good economic policy, and that does not include an income tax.
I good to go? That's excellent. All right. So I'm just going to reinforce what Drew just said. This isn't just anecdotal about capital flight. It is happening and has been happening for several years now. The capital gains income tax started it. The increase, primarily the increase in capital gains and the excise and the death tax have accelerated it. I could sit here afterwards and probably give you 2 or 3 dozen folks who have relocated just in the last 6 to 9 months, and many, many more that are planning it. That doesn't include the companies that are already planning it. And I want to be clear. The signal's been sent. They're not welcome here, and they're planning. Whether they pull the trigger or not, we'll know the day they do it. They won't tell us ahead of time. They'll just decide, and you'll see the effects in our revenue immediately. That's what we're faced here. We are sending a signal to businesses and folks who can afford to relocate that you're no longer welcome here, and they are receiving that signal and acting accordingly. And that will have long-term negative effects on our economy. But in addition to that, I'd just like to point out that income tax is something that we have debated in our state for many, many years. I see Tim Imons here, and he's got a sticker. I think there may be one there for every time the people have rejected this idea at the ballots. This is a deeply unpopular opinion or idea across income levels. And I want to say another thing, just to follow up on something that Representative Stokesbury said. When you look at migration numbers, folks moving en masse from income tax states to non-income tax states, that's not at a particular income level. It's across income levels. People at all income levels say, this is prohibiting me from being, from living the life I want for me and my family. I'm going to go somewhere that cares about my future, cares about my opportunity, and increasingly, because of policies put forth by the Democratic majority, they no longer think that state government here in Washington cares about them, their families, and their future.
All right, we have time for a couple more questions. Jonathan?
Yeah, I want to ask about the tort liability bomb that's going off in state agencies. Sorry. I want to ask about the tort liability bomb going off in state agencies. The self-insurance fund is projected about $3 billion in the hole by about 2030. What are your plans this session to deal with this, both in the short and the long term?
Well, I think this is, I'm glad you brought it up, and this is a big challenge, something we should have been talking about, and frankly, Republicans have been talking about for several years. And I want to start by saying this is tragic. $500 million a year isn't just a huge cost that we cannot afford at the state level. Think of the harm that the state has done to folks in their care, primarily children, to cause those kinds of rulings. We should all be deeply saddened and frankly embarrassed that that's how our state government has operated for many, many years. How we fix it is more challenging. The first step isn't to change the process so that the awards are lower. The first step is to think, how do we do less harm to those in our care, in particular to children in our care? And we have some serious problems. Many of you heard me talk about the challenges in our juvenile rehabilitation program, and the cost of that, the tort cost of that, is just starting. And this is not something, and you'll hear this argument from many on the other side, that this is all stuff that was done decades ago, and there's some truth to that. But we are doing damage right now today in our state because of policies put in place like JR 25 that we were not prepared to execute in a safe way without hurting, frankly, both the people in our care and the staff that take care of them. We got a long ways to go. We're not going to solve it by simply changing the tort liability system, although I am certainly in favor of that. We need to change it by changing the way we deal with people that we are required to take care of.
I agree with everything Senator Brown said. I'll only add one point, which is, as a factual matter, one single political party has occupied the executive residence every day since literally the day I was born. John Spellman's last day in office was the day I was born. Ever since then, there's been 40 uninterrupted years of one party appointing every single head of every agency and every department in the state. At some point, we need to recognize that the current status quo is failing, that new ideas and new perspectives are needed. I hope that is coming with our new governor. I hope this is a question that you ask him when he comes in a few minutes. But I think absolutely we need to do a better job, not just in figuring out how we fund the current liability confronting us, but how do we avoid causing this harm in the future? Because for 40 years, I think we've been stuck in the mud.
So first of all, I would say one of the reasons that the governor had such a significant challenge in terms of balancing the budget was that he's taking on in his supplemental budget proposal the idea of funding the tort liability account. That is the biggest single expenditure that he was taking on in the supplemental budget. The second thing that I would say is that Senator Dingra has been working with stakeholders and with the governor's office and the attorney general on some process changes for how claims would be filed and dealt with in their initial stages that I think folks think are quite promising, potentially in terms of speeding access to justice for people who have been harmed, but also reducing the likelihood of these very significant awards that we've been seeing. You know, the reality is that we had a single change approved by the legislature. I think it was originally a Republican bill about the statute of limitations for childhood sexual abuse that has driven a lot of the increase in claims activity. I don't disagree at all with Senator Braun. I think when we have victims, we need to focus on changing the systems to make sure that we're taking care of the people who are in state care. At the same time, it's, I think, important to acknowledge that when you have very old claims, and some of these are very old claims, they become incredibly difficult to defend. And so that's put the torts division at the Attorney General's office in a tough position. So I think there, as with the housing issue, we didn't get into this problem in the course of a session or two. It's going to take us a while to dig out of it, but I think we are attentive to it and are looking forward to having some good discussion this session about how to tackle those issues.
I'll just add briefly, I don't have any disagreement at all with what Senator Peterson just said, and some agreement with actually what Senator Braun said, in terms of our obligations to make sure that those that are in our care have the best care and are treated well in Washington's care, and that's a place where we continually need to improve on the care that we provide in all sorts of very high-risk situations. But I just talked to Senator Dingra last night, and I know that Rep. Taylor, the chair of the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee, and the House is working with her, and I think we're very intrigued by the work that the proposal from the governor's office, and are excited to see where we can go with that.
All right, Jerry? Probably going to be our last question.
A budget shortfall question. The governor makes two very big moves to try to get to a balanced ledger sheet. He moves $700 million in the Climate Commitment Act account in the general fund, and he drains half of the rainy day fund. I wondered if each of you could comment on whether you agree with those two moves. If not, what are the big moves your caucus is looking at to deal with the shortfall?
Oh, sure. I'll jump right in there. So I agree with one, don't agree with the other. Moving the CCA to cover working families tax credit is something that we proposed in the Republican budget last year. We think it makes sense. It's allowed under statute. In fact, it's the top of the list in terms of allowable uses. And you have to acknowledge that the Climate Commitment Act is a very regressive program. We talk a lot about that around here. It's time we did something about it. To use that money to help folks at the lower end of the economic scale with a working families tax credit is, I think, the absolutely the right thing to do. And I would add, on top of that, the other ways we've spent that money, presumably to reduce carbon, have done very little to reduce carbon, and even that has, as we saw recently, has sometimes been wildly overstated. So it's not like we're taking that money out of some magic carbon reducing program and putting it somewhere else. We're just taking it and we're helping folks who most need to afford to live here in the state of Washington. So I think that's a good move, and I appreciate the governor doing that. Taking money out of the rainy day fund when it is not, in fact, a rainy day, I think is the wrong answer. We are not in a recession. Employment is growing, although not as fast as it once did. Our revenue is growing, although not as fast as it once did. But what we do know is that we will be in a recession someday, and if we use this money now when we are not, instead of just applying good, sound budget principles and meeting the priorities of government, we are going to get ourselves in a bad situation in the future. The recent study came out, said Washington, I think, is currently the worst prepared in the country when it comes to a reserve account. That's in part because we have repeatedly used the rainy day fund when we didn't need to do it. Instead of making tough budget decisions, we should do that now, make the hard budget decisions, live within our means, and make sure we have a healthy rainy day account when we really need it.
I agree with Senator Braun on both points. As he mentioned, using Climate Commitment Act dollars to fund the Working Families Tax Credit has been a Republican priority and proposal for the last several years. Governor Ferguson said last year that we shouldn't really care if something is a Republican idea or a Democrat idea. We should just care if it's a good idea. So I appreciate him following Republicans' lead on this issue and recognizing the good idea that we had. And as Senator Brown points out, the CCA has shown to only reduce carbon by something like 0.008% so far. So this is a far better use of the money to, if we can't get rid of the regressive CCA, to at least ameliorate its regressive characteristics to the extent possible. And then likewise, I agree with him on the lack of wisdom of rating the rainy day fund. That should be an absolute last resort, not your first move out of the gate. We have yet to completely scrub the budget. We've yet to zero base it. We've yet to audit our state agencies. We've yet to understand the extent of daycare fraud in this state. We should not, the day one move should not be to raid the rainy day fund. The day one moves should be to figure out how we can root out all the waste and fraud, figure out which programs aren't working, and no matter how good of an idea they are, and save money that way rather than simply raid the piggy bank.
All right, we just have like 3 minutes left if you guys want to.
Leave a minute for me.
All right, I'll leave it, maybe I'll even leave 2. I would say generally what I have encouraged my caucus to do is not to draw any lines in the sand. Obviously, it's not ideal either to be using Climate Commitment Act dollars for things other than carbon reduction, and it's not ideal to be spending money out of the budget stabilization account. And at the same time, we're going to have a lot of other choices that we're going to make that are not ideal because we are in the second year of a biennium facing a significant shortfall. And so we're going to have to make difficult choices. That will be one of the big themes of this session. Compared to some of the other difficult choices that we may have to make, I suspect that both of those ideas in some form may be part of the final budget that helps us get out of here on time, which is I'm very committed to.
I would just say that it is true that the CCA, the Working Families Tax Credit is an authorized expenditure. I think there's a lot of discussion within our caucus about whether or not that's the best expenditure or not of CCA funds. And I think it's really too early for me to say how that's going to end up in the budget. On the rainy day fund, I just do want to note that we have like $170 million tab that the federal government has sent us to build IT systems to be able to start denying people Medicaid in this state and food. Like, how are we going to pay for that? We have to find a way to pay for that. And that is part of what is driving the need for rainy day funds. I think the estimate right now is almost $170 million just for those kinds of things. The final thing I just want to say is about these suggestions about fraud with really no basis yet. Listen, every person in Washington state is entitled to make sure that we have well-running, functioning government systems. We have a state auditor who audits our agencies every year and has many times pointed out areas for improvement. But when you look at our child care system, DCYF itself has done a number of audits. Last year, they did 29,000 consumer audits. They did 1,400 provider audits, finding no widespread abuse. Now, you can ask the state auditor to go ahead and check on that, but to cavalierly suggest that there is some kind of fraud going on when we have been doing that kind of work, I think is unfair to child care providers. It's unfair to the people who are receiving child care in this state. It's unfair to our kids, and it's unfair to the agencies who are working very hard to provide great services to Washingtonians.
All right, thank you all very much.
Whoever was the clapper, thank you.
Okay, there we go.
You're welcome. Thank you, appreciate it. Mic check 1, 2.
A new variety for us. It's an eastern United States tree, but it produced a product, a white walnut, that would last and last and last. And this butternut tree really tells, in some ways, the story of our state as it grew and prospered 176 years, provided seedlings for many other locations around the state. I've had the opportunity to visit Bush Prairie.
All right, last but not least, joining us for the second year in a row as governor, please welcome Governor Bob Ferguson.
Excuse me. Thanks so much. Happy New Year, everybody. I think we've got a half hour, so I want to get to as many of your questions as possible. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you guys. Yeah. Chris.
We just heard the speaker discuss allegations of fraud with DCYF. You know the allegations in Minnesota when it comes to subsidized childcare in Minnesota. Here in Washington State, the former auditor that you know, a Democrat, Brian Sontag, has suggested there could be an outside audit of DCYF. In 2024, there was a statewide audit by the auditor's office suggesting that $500 million that was allocated for DCYF did not have adequate controls, and then DCYF has also acknowledged an overpayment in the last year of $2 million to more than 1,300 providers. So with that context, would you support an outside audit? And if the answer is no, why not?
Yeah, happy to have a conversation about it. A couple of things I'd want the people of the state of Washington to know. So number one, I spent 12 years as Attorney General, and as you know, Chris, take fraud pretty seriously. We were pretty engaged in addressing Medicaid fraud and fraud of all kinds for consumers, so I have a fairly extensive background on this to make sure that where there is fraud, in whatever context, that we're addressing it. Number two, the people of the state of Washington should know that for our child care providers, we literally send someone to each child care provider in person every single year, at least one time a year. That happens every year in our state to every single provider. So what I would say is we take that seriously in any context. And I've always been, I think, pretty clear that, hey, our system isn't perfect. I suspect most systems aren't perfect anywhere. And our job as state, I think what Lori, the speaker, said, which I agree with, is, hey, it's our job to make sure every dollar is accountable to the people. If we see credible allegations of fraud, we take that seriously. Child care providers are no different than anybody else in our state. So welcome a conversation about that in any context. What I would say is if we're talking about audits, it should be in multiple, multiple areas if that's what we're looking at. So I haven't seen what Brian Sontag had to say, but we're curious what others think as well, and always open to a conversation about that. Yeah, John.
On the income tax proposal.
The millionaire's tax, yes. Yes.
Can a tax be designed so it would survive a Supreme Court ruling? And if it can't be designed, how would you design it? Essentially, that seems like a major obstacle for a millionaire's tax.
Sure. I don't disagree that that's an obstacle. I guess I'd say three things need to happen for a millionaire's tax to be implemented. One, it's got to pass the state legislature. I think there's a good chance that happens this year. Number two, it needs to survive a legal challenge. I would not be proposing it if I didn't feel confident that it would survive that legal challenge. I agree with everything you said, John, but hey, there's how you draft that. These things matter, as you might imagine. I've got thoughts about that. But I think there's a good chance it survives that legal challenge. And obviously, there's going to be a public conversation at the ballot box about that. No two ways around that as well. And I do think that where the people of the state are right now when it comes to our regressive tax system, I think they're ready for a change and ready to take steps that in the past maybe they did not. I mean, I want to keep my answer short because I know there's a lot of questions, but a lot depends on how that is structured, okay? It looks like maybe you're about to ask that. Okay. Yep, so, and I think I was pretty clear when I announced it, what my thoughts are. So for me, and we're running numbers on exactly how much it brings in, depends on exactly how it's structured. But for the sake of discussion, let's say we're talking about $3.5 billion a year in revenue that would come from it. My view is very clear that that is not just $3.5 billion that goes into our general fund every year to pay for government, right? I don't support that. We have to have a significant portion of those dollars go directly back to Washingtonians. So I talked about the Working Families Tax Credit, which is a rebate, obviously, to many thousands of Washingtonians. If we're going to do this, if they want me to sign it, we have to increase the number of Washingtonians eligible for that Working Families Tax Credit, for that rebate, that check that they receive, and expand eligibility and increase the amount. Number two, small business owners, right, the backbone of our economy. There has to be a specific exemption for more small business owners who pay the B&O tax. I had a specific proposal of what that would look like, but there's going to have to be tax relief for small business owners. That's a direct result of those dollars. I've also laid out and just so folks who are viewing it, just so I'll repeat the question so folks have some context. So this is legislation saying, hey, if you're not a law enforcement officer, essentially, you can't be wearing, for example, something that gives the impression you are a constable, that you're a law enforcement person, you're a sheriff. I think my interest is probably pretty obvious. I've just got deep concerns of what's going on across our country right now. Those things are happening with tragic consequences right now. There's a lot of fear in many communities right now. And we need to have tighter controls over, who's walking around with what sort of insignia they're wearing that suggests they're law enforcement. So there's other proposals in the legislature. I think Javier Valdez has a proposal to eliminate masks from law enforcement officers. I completely support that concept for sure. So there'll be others as well that I didn't necessarily propose that get to that issue as well. So lots of thoughts about those, but it is just to your question, I'll just wrap up by saying it is always a challenge to try to narrow down which bills to focus on. But those seem time sensitive in the sense that they're right in front of us, and really wanted to get the conversation going with the legislature on those. So let's go more to, yes, right, yeah, go ahead.
Can you please address concerns that the millionaire's tax would drive innovators out of the state?
Yeah, I'm concerned the fact that I think 41 states have an income tax. I don't think that's going to happen. Number two, Washington is a state that is attractive to people for all sorts of reasons. And so I'm confident if we construct a millionaire's tax that has folks who are extremely wealthy pay a bit more, and that specifically allows, back to the earlier question, tax relief for Washingtonians, help drive our economy, help make our economy work, and for Washingtonians who are struggling, I think most folks support that. And so, I hear that concern, but like I said, 41 states have an income tax. They seem to be surviving so far. But the key is, it can't just be, I'm just going to repeat this, it can't just be $3.5 billion that goes in the general fund. I don't support that. I want to be clear, don't support that. It's got to be targeted, that we know where these dollars are going and they're helping out Washingtonians. In other words, it's a tax break for thousands and thousands of Washingtonians as a result of doing the millionaire's tax. So that's the balance we need to seek, and I think most Washingtonians, and I think even most millionaires will support that. Yeah.
In the last session, Speaker Jenkins and Majority Leader Peterson said that they don't have plans to hear either one of the Let's Go Washington initiatives. I was just wondering, could we get your position on each of those initiatives? Are you opposed to both of them? And then do you support that path that the legislature is then planning to take, allowing those initiatives to go to the voters?
And these are the two Bill Haywood initiatives, is that what we're talking about?
Yeah.
So I've not looked at them, but it'd be the first time I ever supported a Bill Haywood initiative. So, I just, to be honest, I've not spent much time looking at that. So, but the question was about what the legislature would do with them?
Well, they're saying they're not even going to hold hearings, so that means they wouldn't pass the legislature. That means they would go to voters. So, do you support the initiatives going to voters then to decide?
Look, Washington State has a very populist bent when it comes to initiatives, right? And the people of our state having a chance to weigh in all sorts of issues. That's, I think a lot of folks have concerns with it. I think it's healthy. So the fact that voters get a chance to weigh in on that, on almost any issue has never really frankly bothered me too much. So I've not had to answer, I'm trying to answer your question best I can. I've not had a conversation with legislators about it. I haven't paid too much attention to I think I saw a headline saying they had the signatures for a couple of them. So I haven't gone any deeper than that. But if what you're hearing is legislators saying it should go to the voters for a vote, I tend, in general, as a general matter, I don't have a problem with that. Yeah. Yes, Randy.
First, just a clarification to make sure I'm not taking something you posted out of context. On December 24th on X, you said, I will not support an income tax on people who make less than $1 million a year.
Correct.
Is that this year or any year?
I don't support it less than $1 million, period.
So now until.
Can't answer any more clear than that.
You will never sign as governor.
Can't answer any more clear than that.
An income tax, okay. On the initiatives, one of them would keep biological boys out of girls' sports.
Okay.
I want to be delicate with this, but since you've made it public, you talk a lot about your own daughter and her participation in athletics publicly. I know she goes to a private school. Would you support a biological boy competing against your own child?
Oh, Brandy forgot. Look, I understand your obsession with trans kids. And so what I would say is that, obsession. And so what I would say is, look, we live in a world right now where trans kids are going through a lot. Okay? And so, I want to support trans kids. We have a federal government that essentially wants to erase that community. I'm diametrically opposed to that. So appreciate the question, but I'm ready for the next one.
Can you give a yes or no on it?
Next question.
The other day, Representative Fitzgibbons proposed a redistricting attempt. Was wondering what your take was on that and whether or not he discussed it with you or you discussed it with any majority members before it was pre-filed.
I haven't read it yet. I think I saw a newspaper article that described it. So I think in the past spoke with Senator Peterson in the past when like California was looking at what they were doing. And I had conversation with a number of legislators then. I can believe I would have spoken to Jamie about it back then. I've not spoken with him, I don't think, about this thing specifically, but as I understand, seeking a constitutional amendment to, it's Joe Fitzgibbon's proposal, right, to change. So I've not seen. What I would say is that in general, what California did, I support, what Gavin Newsom did. In general, I would never want to change our system, but obviously the rules have changed. States like Texas are doing what they're doing. Given that context, I don't think some states play with one set of rules on redistricting and states like Washington play with a different set of rules. That doesn't make sense to me. I didn't propose anything along that because it just doesn't seem like it's going to pass. You need a constitutional amendment that takes 2/3. There's not 2/3 vote. So all that's to say, the concept of looking at that and proposing it, I'm happy to have that conversation about that. I just don't think there are the votes there for it, but I understand why Representative Fitzgibbons, sorry if I said Jamie earlier, Representative Fitzgibbons is proposing that. I haven't taken a look at it specifically, but certainly what California did, if I'd been governor of California at the time, I would have proposed exactly what Gavin Newsom did, because there they had the votes for the 2/3. They also had to make a constitutional amendment, I believe, in California to go forward, and they obviously had the majorities there in which to do it. Let's go to someone who hasn't asked. Yeah, in the back.
Hi, my name is, sorry.
Hi, Evelyn Archibald. I'm with the University of Washington Daily.
Great.
So you proposed a repeal of the data center tax exemption.
Right.
And you cited major use of electricity and fewer permanent jobs than expected. I was just hoping that you could explain a little bit more about that decision and also how you might see that impacting Washington State's relationship with the tech industry.
Sure. So on that, I guess a couple of things. So one is, there are, as you no doubt know, different tax breaks associated with these data centers. So a significant set of these tax exemptions come when you construct it, for example, right? That there are exemptions based around that. So my proposal doesn't address those. Wouldn't be shocked if there's a conversation in the legislature about that, I want to be clear, but that's not what I'm proposing. What I propose is once the data center is in place, there are things you do to replace equipment, that type of thing, once the data center is in place. And there are tax exemptions for that, for some of those purchases, and I'm proposing eliminating those tax exemptions, just to be clear what the conversation is here. What I would say is that, to answer your question more specifically, is we're facing a challenging budget situation. We have to balance that budget, and I wanted to do that in a way that did not raise taxes. So once you start from that starting point of you're not raising taxes to balance the budget and you've got a shortfall, you've got to find a way to do that. And so we looked at a lot of different options for how to propose that. Obviously, my proposed budget's a start of a conversation, but that struck me as one that was fair and appropriate, and one that I thought made sense given the budget challenges that we're facing. Yes.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of circle back to the allegations of potential fraud in DCYF. AG Brown and DCYF both came out with statements basically saying that they were asking people that saw reporters or independent journalists, activists, whatever you want to call them, in neighborhoods door knocking to do those investigations, that should be reported as a hate crime. I'm one of the members of the media that has done some of that door knocking and investigation in my own neighborhood and have received very ugly threats online that have had to be reported to police. Are you willing to publicly support our First Amendment rights as reporters to look into those things? I'm not sure knocking on a door and inquiring is harassment, but the suggestion's been made that it is, and that people should be reporting reporters. Are you willing to say that we have a right to be out there investigating potentially hundreds of millions of dollars in fraud at a time when the state's facing another deficit?
Well, I've been pretty clear about my support for free speech. I guess what I would say, though, folks, if someone's knocking on their door, it depends what that knocking on door is, or if there's harassment involved or not. I'm set aside press or not press or whatever it is. And so each situation depends on the facts of what's going on at that door, right? But if it's somebody's home and there's kids inside, I can understand why folks are concerned if someone they don't recognize is knocking on the door. So it's just a balance like anything else, right? If folks are acting appropriately, that's one thing. If they're not acting appropriately and it gets crosses a line of harassment, that's something different. So each situation is its own situation. And so I haven't seen the statements from the folks you mentioned, but I think we can balance those things out, right? Respectful.
That AG Brown's office put out a statement last week encouraging people to call the hate crimes hotline if they saw a reporter.
I'm aware, in fact, we as a state have communicated to child care providers to make sure that they understand what their rights are, to make sure we're aware of the situation. And so that's up to an individual. If they feel that there's harassment, that's up to them to provide that. That's a fact-based inquiry, right? That's up to the facts to determine that. So, which I think is the appropriate way to handle it. Let's go to others who haven't asked yet. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the tort liability bonds going on in state agencies. We haven't talked about that with your office yet, but the previous panel talked about some reforms of the claims process, and as well as I know your budget funded the liability. There's still a projected $3 billion deficit in the self-liability fund by like 2030.
Yep.
What's the long-term fix here for, making sure we don't have a lot of kids with very serious
And as you well know, there have been changes in recent years with our state Supreme Court that has expanded significantly, the liability of the state. Some of these cases are quite old where the state has a hard time defending itself, and that's putting it diplomatically. And so as a result, I track this pretty closely with my team. I see those numbers. So I guess what I would say at this stage as we're about to start the session is that it's my sense that, I've only been governor for a year, but obviously I was AG for 12 where these issues were around as well. And so what I would say is I'm confident that there's a greater focus on that issue this session than in the past. And we're going to be involved in those conversations and seeing what we can do this session to address that for all the reasons you mentioned and for the long-term health of the state financially. So don't have more details right now. I understand you're interested in that. Happy as things go forward to engage more on it, but it's one that I get pretty regular updates every week about kind of those cases specifically, what those payments are, what the long-term prognosis is. And so I wouldn't be surprised if we see some action this legislative session around that. Thanks. Yeah.
You just mentioned you just finishing your first year, about to start your second year. Could you reflect for a moment for us on maybe what you learned that you didn't know or surprised you in your first year, and what you're looking to improve on in the second year?
I don't know about surprises. It's I mean, I felt pretty prepared for the job. I mean, 12 years as AG, you get a sense of state government and I mean, look, a clear surprise, I guess, a clear surprise was obviously a $16 billion budget shortfall. That was, that wasn't just a surprise, that was a shock. You followed the campaign pretty closely, Jerry. The budget situation never came up. Nobody ever asked me a question about a budget shortfall. That wasn't a thing. That wasn't public. I think that came out maybe within the week after I got elected. So I think it's more than fair to say that was a surprise. And having to very quickly deal with that challenge right away, which obviously occupied a lot of our time those first few months. So there were specific issues. I've been surprised by, had a lot of dealings with the Trump administration on his first administration. This administration is very different than that one in terms of what's going on, the challenges we have as a state dealing with that. So that has certainly been a surprise. But in terms of like doing the job itself, if that's what you're asking, I don't know that there's been some major, major surprise to me. I guess what I just would add is I think any new job, I don't care what your new job is, you're a journalist, you're a teacher, whatever your job is, right? When you get a new job, there's obviously always a transition. I don't care who you are or how well prepared you are. There's obviously a transition. It's a new job. Got new people, trying to bring folks together, you're trying to learn your job, you got a lot going on. It's a change for your family. That's certainly the case for being governor, it's a change for the family. And so of course there's always a transition, but I didn't feel like it was, in some ways becoming Attorney General was a bigger challenge for me transitioning to that than being governor, to be perfectly honest. Like that first 6 months was a real challenge being AG, to go from being on the King County Council, right? Where you just supervise a handful of people, to running a very, very large, complex agency. In some respects, I think that was more of a challenge than the transition to being governor.
What about this coming year? Have you made any goals or set any things you want to achieve either in the session or in the 12
I'm a goal-focused person, Jerry. So yes, of course. It's a long list, whether it's legislative items or continue to get our budget situation under control. That's a big priority for me. I'm thankful that, last year, the budget did not assume 4.5% revenue growth, which is not what our Economic Forecast Council says. For years we've been doing that. State law allows, as you know, the legislature to assume 4.5% revenue growth when adopting a budget, even if the experts say your revenue growth is going to be 3.3%. Well, that's part of how we got into a $16 billion shortfall. So I was pretty clear I wouldn't sign a budget that did that. Thankfully, the budget that I signed did not do that. So, big focus is continuing to try and get our arms around the budget challenges that we're facing. A big goal we have is doing everything we can to make as persuasive as a case as possible to the federal government on disaster relief. That's going to be huge for us. I'm spending a lot of time on that. I'll be, not long after this conversation, be doing some work around that, to a video we're putting together on it. That's going to be huge to be as persuasive as we can. We've talked about budget challenges. I don't want to think about, if we don't get that disaster relief granted, what that means for infrastructure, or the cost for infrastructure. We don't have a dollar amount yet on what that cost is going to be, but that's going to be expensive, and we're going to need the federal government to step up on that. So, there's of course a zillion goals we have for the year, but I guess I'll just add one more, which would be, I just really believe strongly that we just sort of got to get back to basics on our budgeting, also in terms of our infrastructure and our investments with our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges. You've heard me talk about the statistics, the number of bridges that are described as poor condition in our state, the number of hundreds of bridges that are 80 years old or older, which is life expectancy for a bridge. We rank near the bottom of all states in terms of our road conditions. Look, those things are unacceptable. We've dug ourselves in a big hole on that, and I'm very, very determined to make sure that we change that next year and in the years to come. I love a ribbon cutting as much as anybody for a new project, but we just have to really focus on the nuts and bolts of our infrastructure right now, because it's a huge challenge for us. I think we have time for one more. Who has not asked a question? Let me ask that. Tim, all right, Happy New Year. What do you got?
Speaking of obsession, I have obsession for the initiative process, and there are a couple of bills that are going to make the signature gathering process dramatically more difficult. One of them says you have to collect 1,000 signatures before you can even approach the code revisor's office and even get a ballot title. Another one says they're going to throw out perfectly valid signatures based on the fact that the person doesn't put their address on the petition. I was curious your view on just the general concept of making the signature gathering process more difficult, not just for the people on the right, but also on the left?
So I haven't seen those bills. Happy to take a look at them. So I just want to be very clear about that. So that's number one. Number two, I think to an earlier question, I haven't, look, some of my friends on my side of the aisle disagree with me on this, but I've always been a supporter of the initiative process, even though you and I may disagree on, some of the outcomes of it. But I just think I'm okay with it, and people having a chance to weigh in, I think I'm good with. And so, and I'm not talking about those pieces of legislation, I just do not know, so I'll be very clear. But, having a system that allows folks in a reasonable way to gather signatures and get to the ballot, I'm all for it. And so, no idea who's proposing, no idea what they mean, but if there are proposals that are moving through the legislature, I'm sure my team and I'll be taking a close look at those to make sure that they maintain what's been around in our state for a very, very long time, right? Which is different than many states. It's a robust, right? It's a robust initiative process, and I've got my strong disagreements sometimes with what goes on the ballot, for sure. But I think it's a part of our state. It's part of our state history, and that I support. So happy to take a look at those. I just don't have a specific answer right now. Thanks so much, everybody, for your time. Really appreciate it. Have a happy New Year, everybody. Appreciate it.
Is there any regret to having government